Chapter 900. After being tortured by Karen Isher, Jinwoo City was on the verge of death. He was lying on the ground with only a silly smile on his face. He probably didn't even know what pain was now. She couldn't get the truth out of him. Even though the enraged female vampire knew this, she couldn't hide the murderous intent in her heart. Only the desire to know the truth made her try her best to maintain the last trace of rationality. "Miss Karen, why did you kill Mr. Two? Because we were the ones who did it?" Elizabeth asked. Karen Isher took a deep breath and said, "I left the castle for 3 years and didn't participate in several hunting days. You should know that, right?" Elizabeth nodded and then said, "We thought you had an argument with Mr. Two. It's just a quarrel." Karen Isher smiled bitterly. "But now that I think about it, if we weren't so serious, if I hadn't left, he wouldn't have." She shook her head and said bitterly, "I came back again because I received news from Jinwoo City that he was dead. When I came back in a hurry, all I saw was a withered corpse. It's him. I can feel it. It's really him. I wanted to destroy everything at that time, but my vengeful heart told me that I couldn't let his murderer go free." "Wait, you said Uncle Jean. Jinwoo City told you?" Zhong Luoyue was taken aback and seemed to have heard something. Karen Isher glanced at the newborn coldly and said in an icy tone, "Do you think I didn't consider this possibility? But you know, Tushini was my first time using him. I know how strong he is better than anyone else. Even if he didn't fight back, Jinwoo City couldn't kill him. What about weapons? Bombs and the like? They might not be able to kill him directly, but sneak attacks." Zhong Luoyue frowned. "And from what Jinwoo City just said, it's very likely that he used indirect means." Karen Isher sighed. "I've thought of all the possibilities you can think of, but Jinwoo City was the first one I ruled out. He had terminal stage liver cancer and had been relying on the medicine that Tushini had concocted with his blood to survive. Jinwoo City is even waiting for an opportunity for Tushini to turn him into a vampire. Tushini is his lifesaver, and he can't destroy himself. In that case, it's true." Zhong Luoyue nodded. "But what he just said doesn't seem to be false. Unfortunately, he won't be able to last long, and there's no possibility of him waking up. The truth can only be hidden forever." I might be able to help," Elizabeth said timidly. Karen Isher was taken aback. She suddenly grabbed Elizabeth's arm. "Mental sensing? You can already invade memories?" I don't know," Elizabeth stammered. "It wasn't possible at first, but after enduring the hunting mania, it seems my ability seems to have become a little different. I feel that I can do it." While speaking, Elizabeth subconsciously glanced at Luo Chio, who was completely immersed in watching the show. She thought in her heart, "Is it because I drank Brother Luo Chio's blood? If you can do it." Karen Isher grabbed Elizabeth's arm and subconsciously tightened her grip. "No, you can try." Elizabeth nodded, then walked to Jinwoo City's side, squatted down, put her palm on Jinwoo City's forehead, and slowly closed her eyes. Zhong Luoyue and Karen Isher looked at each other nervously. Luochio took a few steps closer to observe Elizabeth. Her ability was probably not mental sensing, but telepathy, invading the other party's consciousness. "It seems possible. I did it." Elizabeth opened her eyes in surprise, and then quickly said, "I can take you to see his memory. Hold my hand." Karen Isher grabbed Elizabeth's wrist without saying a word. Zhong Luoyue hesitated for a moment, then gently held Elizabeth's hand. "Is your shoulder okay?" Luochio walked over. Elizabeth nodded. Luochio put his palm on Elizabeth's shoulder. "Ready? I will take you into his consciousness. Please relax a little. Brother Luochio, your consciousness is too strong. Oh, okay, it's okay now." Elizabeth took a deep breath and slowly closed her eyes. It was a wonderful experience. Her body seemed to become infinitely lighter and finally separated from her body. The moment she closed her eyes, many things floated in front of Zhong Luoyue's eyes. Those things were the reflections of her inner memories. The mental world was very complicated and mysterious. Under Elizabeth's ability, the ropes of the several people were twisted into a ball of fried dough twist, constantly penetrating each other. Whether it was Karen Isher Elizabeth, or even Zhong Luoyue, the things that left a deep impression on them were all open in front of Luocchio's eyes without reservation. But they couldn't get any information about Luocchio from this fried dough twist of consciousness. Their consciousness suddenly condensed and appeared in a dark basement. They all looked at Luocchio with different expressions. Luocchio. Luocchio looked around, pretending to study seriously. Karen Isher furrowed her brows. Without a doubt, she had already sensed that her memories had been inexplicably read by the other three. Elizabeth became flustered. As for Zhong Luoyue, she felt dizzy. After all, her spirit was too weak. The process of consciousness transformation had not been handled by her consciousness. However, she vaguely felt that something was wrong. It was as if someone had suddenly moved into her heart. I'm sorry, it's my first time doing this. Elizabeth realized what had happened and quickly apologized. I didn't know it would be like this. Where is this place? Karen Isher asked directly. This is the memory scene of Jinwu City. Elizabeth said, his memory is too chaotic now. I can only find some of his most intense and most profound memory scenes. There seems to be a sound. Zhong Luoyue pointed at a stone door in front and suddenly said, have we been here before? This was the place where she found Elizabeth when she followed Luocchio. The cell full of horrible scratches. The sound, some screams, came from this stone room. It's his voice. Karen Isher rushed toward the huge door of the stone room without thinking, but her body was instantly bounced back. She could not break through the door. Miss Karen, it's useless. Elizabeth quickly said, this is only the memory of Jinwu City. The voice we heard is also one of his memories. So if he doesn't open this door, we don't know what happened inside. He should be here soon. Luocchio suddenly said, the sound is getting louder. It means that the distance is closing. Sure enough, the screams of pain gradually became louder. As Karen Isher waited anxiously, finally, a figure came out of the darkness. It was Jinwu City. At this moment, he was holding a lantern in his hand and was cautiously approaching this place. He was very careful with every step. There was even a frightened expression on his face. Finally, he came to the door of this stone cell and opened it with force. The light of the lantern shone into the stone room. A man with disheveled hair was locked to the wall. He bared his fangs. His face was thin, his body was thin, his eyes were sunken, and his face was pale. He was struggling frantically. This is Mr. Two? Elizabeth subconsciously covered her mouth. Karen Isher gritted her teeth and nodded. She clenched her fists hard, her whole body trembled, and her fangs were faintly visible. Jinwu City stood outside the door for a long time before he finally pushed the door open and walked in. As he walked in, the surrounding environment quickly changed. Luocchio and others were finally able to enter the stone room. Jinwu City was approaching Tushini step by step. You must be very hungry, right? Jinwu City suddenly whispered. You must be very hungry. He quickly pinched up his sleeve, exposing his arm, and put it directly in front of Tushini. Bite me. Bite me. I'll let you suck my blood. Bite me. Bite me. Tushini suddenly stopped struggling. He opened his mouth slightly, bared his fangs, and approached Jinwu City's wrist little by little. Jinwu City's eyes began to burn and even became anxious. Finally, Tushini opened his mouth completely, and the blood-sucking fangs were on the skin of Jinwu City's wrist. But his lips kept twitching, and he didn't bite down. Bite me. Quick. Bite me. Bite me. Jinwu City said angrily. What kind of vampire are you? Don't you dare to bite me? Trash. Get out. At this time, Tushini suddenly let out a terrifying roar, which made Jinwu City retreat in fear. He was so scared that he staggered and fell to the ground. Jinwu City got up unwillingly and pointed angrily. I've been with you for more than 10 years, working like a horse, but you're still unwilling to save me? Is it so difficult for you to just open your mouth? Tushini, I've had enough. Do you know the pain when I'm sick? Do you know the humiliation and helplessness that I have to rely on your medicine to survive every single time? Tushini, why are you so selfish? Get out. Get out. You force me. You force me. Jinwoo City took out a bright silver pistol from his bosom and crazily pulled the trigger at Tu Shinny. Bullets continuously shot into Tu Shinny's body, but the vampire's powerful self-healing ability allowed him to tenaciously survive after Jinwoo City ran out of bullets. After venting his frustrations in Jinwoo City, he left this place with hatred in his heart. Karen Isher didn't say a single word from start to finish, nor did she move in the slightest. However, the hatred in her eyes had already reached a terrifying level. Every day, Jinwoo City hoped that Tu Shinny could give him a new life, but every day, he only got disappointment. One day, Jinwoo City was looking at an old photo in his room, and then suddenly fell to the ground in pain. His cancer was acting up. He was in so much pain that he smashed everything in the room. Finally, he had to take out a syringe and a bottle from the drawer and inject the medicine inside. But at this time, there was something called madness in his eyes. He really couldn't kill Tu Shinny with guns, knives, and so on. But there were actually many ways to kill vampires because vampires were not immortal in the true sense. At night, Jinwoo City cut off Tu Shinny's limbs with a sharp machete, and then quietly took him out of the stone room. He was finally loaded into a steel cage and placed on the top floor of the west tower of the castle. Then Tu Shinny saw the first ray of sunlight. Strangely, it was silent at this time. It was not that Jinwoo City suddenly went deaf, but Tu Shinny did not speak. He was quite quiet. Even when the gradually rising sun burned his body, he just looked at the rising sun silently. His body began to emit bursts of green smoke. Finally, Tu Shinny slowly looked at Jinwoo City. I haven't seen the sunrise for a long time. In fact, whether in the past or now, the sunrise is real but very beautiful. Jinwoo City had fallen into a kind of paranoia and madness at this time. He sneered, "It's a pity that the woman you love most is not here. You can disappear forever with this feeling and romance." Tu Shinny was still looking at Jinwoo City and suddenly whispered, "Actually, you've been a vampire for a long time." Jinwoo City grasped the cage tightly, opened his eyes wide, and said crazily, "I'll give you one last chance. As long as you're willing to give me the embrace, I'll let you go. I'll still be your ox, your horse, and your dog. Do you know whose blood I sucked the first time I sucked human blood?" Tu Shinny asked calmly. "This has nothing to do with me." Tu Shinny looked in the direction of the rising sun and said slowly, "It was a child. She was separated from her parents, and fate arranged for her to be in front of me. I used to be like that. Don't talk to me about this nonsense. You just don't want to. You just don't want to save me." Jinwoo City scolded him, pointed angrily, and kicked the cage crazily. "Do you think I can't save myself without you? Look at what this is. This is your thing. Now it's in my hands." Jinwoo City took out an old notebook from his arms and grinned. "I know the secret of Daylily." Tu Shinny acted as if he hadn't heard anything and muttered to himself, "Sweet, fresh, or thick like milk and honey. Sometimes delicate, sometimes spicy like liquor, but not bitter. But at the same time, it makes your throat feel slightly hot, warm. I used to be like that. I regret it." His body suddenly started burning. Jin Wuching just watched in silence. The woman came at night, opened the door of the castle with both hands, and rushed into the depths of the castle. She only saw a black coffin, and Jin Wuching was the only one standing in the room. The woman looked at the body in the black coffin, and a tear fell from her eye. With an unstable voice, she asked in a low voice, "Who did this?" Her voice was so shaky that it sounded as if it had been torn apart and pieced back together again. "I don't know. I was knocked unconscious." And then Jinwoo City lowered his head in pain. He hugged his head and squatted in pain. "How could this be? How could this be? Tu Shinny, you promised to save me. Why? You lied to me. You didn't die, right?" Jin Woo Chung roared madly at the black coffin. "Enough." The woman waved her hand and swept Jin Woo City away. His body slammed into the wall, and the huge impact made Jin Woo City spit out a mouthful of blood. "He promised to save me. He promised me." He only lowered his head and said in a daze, "Clues, any clues? Quickly think of them." The woman seemed to be in desperate need of a reason to calm herself down, but she could no longer suppress the sharp teeth that were exposed because of her sadness. She rushed to the side of the black coffin and fell into a daze. Jinwoo City slowly stood up, staggered, and finally came in front of the woman. He took out a notebook from his arms. "Miss Karen, I found this in Master's room. The last few pages seem to have been torn away." She took the notebook and flipped through it quickly. The last few pages were indeed gone. True blood. Who is it? Yin 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 yin. Chapter 901. They were powerful and had a long history. They had lived through countless years and experienced unimaginable conspiracies and tricks. They also looked at humans as if they were food. The Night Walker was noble and elegant, lazy and decadent, and at the same time had an ageless face. Perhaps many people thought that they were almost perfect, but there were moments when they were toyed with by the humans they despised. There was no coercion or coercion. It was just a small trick, a sad performance, and the humans turned them into tools to achieve their ambitions. It was hard to say who was more pitiful. Luochio and the others had already withdrawn from Jinwoo City's memory. What happened after that was just Jinwoo City as a participant and all the preparations for how to find the real murderer with Karen Isher. In order to make the real murderer feel surprised, Karen Isher transformed into two Shinny. For this reason, she even sent her 3 lives to Sitar. And all of this was actually Jinwoo City's purposeful attempt to recover all the Daylily series. The purpose was to create what was recorded in the last few pages of a notebook. Of course, in order to gain Karen Isher's trust, he had been begging this senior of 2 Shinny to give him a chance to turn him into a vampire. Is it true that behind every revenge story, there's a desire to make people vomit? Zhong Luoyue sighed faintly. She was the first to speak. Karen Isher did not speak. The moment her consciousness withdrew and returned, she sat down as if her consciousness had been pulled out again. She lowered her head, holding the blood-colored patterned sword to support herself. Her pale hair hung down on both sides, completely covering her face. Jinwoo City was dead. The moment their consciousness left Jinwoo City's memory was also the moment Jinwoo City died. His body had long been fragile, and after being tortured, he did not know what kept his consciousness awake. Even if he was awake, it was chaotic. However, when the consciousness that invaded his memory left, he instinctively felt relaxed. He breathed a sigh of relief and welcomed death. Luochio sized up Jinwoo Cheng's corpse. Suddenly, he went to Jinwoo Cheng's side and squatted down. He glanced at Jinwoo City's severed finger and frowned. Finally, Luochio opened his palm. In this chaotic laboratory, there was suddenly a mixture of black matter and mechanical components surging. Finally, something emerged from it and slowly flew into Luochio's palm. What flew over was a black finger glove. It was the finger glove that Jinwoo City had worn on his severed finger. Elisabeth and Zhong Luoyue looked at Luochio curiously. Zhong Luoyue felt a little numb to this kind of supernatural thing. She even felt that this kind of telekinesis was child's play. At this time, Luochio rubbed the finger glove with his fingers and then pulled out something from the glove bit by bit. "This is—" Elizabeth cried out in confusion. What he took out from the black finger glove was a few rolled-up papers. After spreading them out, he found that they were torn off. Luochio looked in the direction of the pure, white room again and reached out his hand. An old notebook flew to his side. Luochio opened it and read it carefully. So these last few pages have always been with him. Karen Isher raised her head at some point. Luochio did not see too much sadness on her face. He just felt that her face was as pale as her hair. But he knew that at least before seeing the black coffin, her hair was not white. Luochio put the remnant pages found in the finger glove back into the notebook, closed it, and handed it to Karen Isher. But she just shook her head gently. Luochio was startled, then nodded, put away the notebook, and said thank you. Karen Isher still did not finish speaking. She suddenly stood up and looked at the Daylily series. "I was just curious. Can you leave me a little of each?" Luochio suddenly asked. Karen Isher said indifferently, "Even if you want to take all of them, I'm afraid I can't stop you. I'll only take a little." A little was just a little. Luochio quickly returned all the daylily series to Karen Isher. She did not say anything. She just held these things with both hands and slowly walked into the pure white room. There was a hidden mechanism in this room. After opening it, one would find that the wall had flipped over. Hidden inside was a black coffin. Karen Isher opened the black coffin and put the daylily series into the coffin. She stood there quietly. There was no need to deliberately peek at what was inside the coffin. Several people who had entered the inner world of Jinwu City could recognize the origin of this coffin. Inside was Tu Shini's corpse. Maybe this Miss Karen has long realized that Jinwu City is a bit strange. Zhong Lue suddenly said faintly. She retrieved these daylily series, probably because they were made by Tu Shini. She just wants to take them back. Tu Shini's relics. A smile suddenly appeared on Karen Isher's face. It was beautiful. When lovers get along for a long time, it is inevitable that there will be some quarrels. Karen Isher said softly, "For us, the meaning of time becomes worthless day by day. We may have more reasons to magnify some small things and try different tastes." She touched the coffin. At first, we were only discussing the possibility of true blood. In fact, he and I both know that true blood can't be created. I see the reality clearly, and he is an idealist. This man is both stupid and romantic. She looked at everyone with a lonely expression. After the quarrel, I traveled the world. During that time, I found that I was thinking about this man all the time. I knew that I loved him even more. I was waiting for an opportunity, waiting for a chance to reunite, but in the end, I didn't get it. In the past 6 months, the only thing that supported me was to find his murderer. She lowered her head and smiled bitterly. She was still beautiful. Sometimes I even wonder if I was born as a human. If I was a human, would I have met him again? The room suddenly shook as if it would collapse at any time. Karen Isher pointed at the wall beside her, only to see the wall begin to crack open, revealing a passageway. "Miss Karen," while Elizabeth shouted, but a large stone fell from above at this moment. At this moment, Karen Isher suddenly put the 3 lives gem into her mouth and slowly walked into the coffin. The floor shattered and the coffin sank. The entire cellar maze began to disintegrate and collapse. Rumble. The ancient castle suddenly collapsed. Those luxurious decorations, those precious antiques, and those long years of history were annihilated in an instant. The servants in the castle escaped in a hurry. Fortunately, no one died. Some of them only felt a little relieved. As for the bodyguards of some celebrities and rich people who were stopped outside the door at the beginning and could not be brought in, they hurried to the scene at this time. Their employer was still inside, and they didn't know whether he was alive or not. But they were afraid that he was in danger. Why did it suddenly collapse? This ancient manor with hundreds of years of history. Was it because it had accumulated too many old things, and it was already time for it to decay? No one knew. They just tried their best to inform the outside world for help. In the ruins of the collapsed ancient castle, a loud noise suddenly came. The piled-up stones exploded, followed by a coughing sound. Zhong Luoyue was the first to walk out of the explosion. She looked up and saw that the stars were not very bright, but the moonlight was very beautiful. After that, Luochio and Elizabeth walked out slowly. Luochio also raised his head to look at the night sky, then at the ruins of the castle. Finally out, Zhong Luoyue leaned against a pillar and slowly slid down. She only felt physically and mentally exhausted, and there was an indescribable feeling. She suddenly found that she didn't seem to hate the night so much. After a moment of silence, Zhong Luoyue suddenly said, "This Miss Karen, did she choose to commit suicide in the end?" "No, I'm afraid she's just sleeping." Elizabeth shook her head and said, "The soul of a suicide victim will be imprisoned in the ocean of pain. If Miss Karen committed suicide, she would not be able to meet Mr. Tu in the world after death." The world after death. Zhong Luoyue shook her head, feeling that the whole world had been completely transformed in front of her. "Then she's sleeping like this?" Zhong Luoyue asked curiously. "She's in a drunken stupor." Luochio suddenly said, In the end, she swallowed 3 lives and was in a drunken stupor. She could wake up at any time, or she could choose to never wake up. Jean Luoyue shook her head with a bitter smile and sighed. There's still one thing I don't understand. She suddenly looked at Luochio. She looked at this mysterious guy who, no matter who it was, always seemed to be able to get the answer from him. Tushini is a vampire, and I've seen the power of vampires. How did Jinwu City tie him up? Did Jinwu City really plot against him? I'm afraid not, Luochio said softly. Mr. Tu should have locked himself up. Elizabeth and Jean Luoyue looked at Luochio in confusion at the same time. Luochio said indifferently, recall the memory of Jinwu City that we saw. When he was in the stone room, he approached cautiously, opened the door and peeped, and he paused. If it was Jinwu City who trapped Mr. Tushini, he didn't have to do that, did he? And from the way he behaves, it's like he just discovered it. Jean Luoyue blurted out. Luochio glanced at Miss Jean. Jean Luoyue quickly covered her mouth, fearing that interrupting the mysterious young man's explanation would make him unhappy. Elizabeth didn't notice this, but she asked curiously, why did Mr. Tu lock himself up? To prevent himself from sucking blood. Luochio said softly, to get rid of the vampire's instincts. Do you still remember the claw marks in the stone room? Dense, crisscrossing claw marks were left on the ground one after another. They nodded subconsciously. Luochio said, I think every claw mark on it contains a strong love for Miss Karen. I really want to dig it out. He wailed in pain, forcibly resisting his instincts and physical needs, like a drug addict trying to detoxify. Only when he couldn't bear it would he use his fingers to grab the cold stone wall. Suddenly, Jean Luoyue and Elizabeth remembered something. When Elizabeth, who was still unfamiliar with telepathy, brought them into the memories of Jinwu City. The moment they saw each other's memories. Christmas 1992. He and she had met at this time 2 years ago in this place. 2 years later, he and she revisited the old place. At this time, he had become the same as her. He and she wore thin clothes and walked into a small bar hand in hand. The atmosphere was as lively as 2 years ago. But this time, the young man was not so poor that he only had a 1 coin left, so he did not continue to play poker with the customers here. He and she sat in front of the bar, just looked at each other quietly waiting for the last bell of Christmas Eve. He suddenly said, actually, I can still feel a taste occasionally. She asked curiously, blood? He whispered, your lips. When the bell rang, the bar became quiet. People were used to being grateful at this moment and hugging their important people. He and she also hugged each other and then kissed each other. I really hope that the days can pass like this. After the kiss, the young man suddenly thought of something. He was really a person full of wonderful ideas. The woman thought so. He said, do you think we can create a substitute that can completely replace blood? I think if one day, when we don't need to eat humans as food, when we can also choose the food in the restaurant, when people are no longer afraid of us, and look at us as if we were yellow, white, and black people. Don't be silly. What if it succeeds? What if it doesn't succeed at all? He said jokingly, if it really can't be done, then I will stop sucking blood and then summarize my experience and finally promote it. Maybe I can even become a star in the vampire circle. This was really an unimaginably silly man. She couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. But this man had a strong ability to act. He was almost thinking about whether this plan was feasible or not. Well, I'm afraid that a lot of money is needed for research. Although you have accumulated a lot of wealth, I'm afraid it's not enough. Not long after, a mythical person appeared in the gambling circle of the world. People only knew his name, but didn't know what he looked like. He wore half a white mask and had never lost in any gambling. People called him the god of gamblers. Chapter 902. In fact, there were still several survivors. They were guests who had escaped from the maze of the cellar. However, there were only 4 of them left. The 4 of them had been trapped in the underground maze all this time. When the underground maze began to collapse, a crack opened up in the ground, allowing them to escape. The 4 people who escaped found that they were less than 1 meter away from the ground. The 4 survivors were really scared. They hid in a corner and shivered. Some of the bodyguards outside the manor found them and asked them what had happened. However, after experiencing what had happened in the underground maze, their minds had become abnormally tense. Blood-sucking monsters. Zombies, a lot of zombies. All of them were zombies. They were nervous and scared to talk about their terrible experience. But those who found them were confused because these things sounded too magical. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I think you're in too much danger and saw hallucinations in your panic. At this time, a black bodyguard said, I just want to ask if you have seen the person in the photo. He is my employer. I want to know if he is still buried alive. Then, different bodyguards came one after another and asked the survivors about their respective employers. Really, believe me, believe us. The survivors held the black bodyguard tightly. The black bodyguard frowned at this moment and looked at his companions beside him, as well as some of his colleagues. They all felt that these people might have been scared silly. What no one noticed was that in the darkness, a figure crawled out of the ruins in the corner with great difficulty. If Zhong Luiyue was here, she would recognize that the person who climbed out of the ruins was Natasha, who had formed a temporary team with her in the maze. She was lucky because Sonda blocked the passage. She didn't meet any zombies along the way. She was about to escape to the exit of the cellar, but the cellar collapsed. However, she was still lucky because she was not buried alive in the end. Instead, she managed to climb out successfully. However, this had exhausted all of her strength. The moment she came out, she saw a large group of bodyguards and several survivors in front of her. Natasha wanted to call out to them, but because of a moment of relaxation, she fell down. Before she could call out, she had already fallen to the ground and fainted. At this time, the survivors became more and more excited. More and more bodyguards gathered around. They looked at the excited reactions of the survivors. Many of them frowned, thinking that things were weird. Did these people collectively see an illusion? Or did they really meet something terrible down there? And then there was this sudden collapse of the building. Everything was filled with a mysterious aura. At this moment, a bat suddenly flew out from the ruins. The bat stood on a large piece of broken rock and looked down at the chaos in the crowd. It suddenly flew up again, and the moment it landed on the ground, it transformed into a black fog. Within the black fog, a handsome man slowly walked out. This group of uneducated and unruly fellows, what have they done? The handsome man shook his head. He was wearing a black tuxedo, and now he came over with his hands behind his back. When he walked out of the crowd, he raised his hand, and there was a bottle in his hand. The handsome man opened the bottle and then slowly blew on it. A wisp of purple smoke, accompanied by a cool breeze, slowly spread into the crowd. They subconsciously inhaled the purple smoke, and then each and every one of them froze on the spot, momentarily absent-minded, including the 4 emotional survivors. At this time, they also became quiet. A very strange scene appeared. The surroundings suddenly became quiet, and everyone was silent. After a moment of silence, the survivors seemed to have woken up. They looked around blankly at the ruins of the manor. Finally, they asked curiously what happened. And those bodyguards at this time, they all scratched their heads, as if they were very confused about this matter. No one noticed that the handsome man in the black tuxedo was walking to another place in the ruins with a light step. Only that small whisper could be heard. The amnesia incantation is about to run out. I need to buy more. At the same time, in the distant sky, several huge black shadows were flying this way. It seemed to be a flying vehicle like a helicopter. Fortunately, the 3 Song brothers escaped from the secret passage of the treasure house. When they came out, the 3 brothers found themselves 1 kilometer away from the manor. Of course, they couldn't just leave like this. After they came out, the mobile phone signal was restored, and the 3 Song brothers hurriedly informed Father Song, who was playing chess with his 5th uncle in the cold house. Father Song didn't doubt what the 3 Song brothers said. After so many years of military life, Song Tianyu had seen a lot of strange things. He vaguely knew that this world wasn't as simple as it seemed. It was just that the 2 most important descendants of the Song family were in this dangerous situation. How could Song Tianyu sit still? He made a phone call, and a certain official army stationed outside the city directly dispatched several armed helicopters. Don't doubt the Song family's secret influence in this country. If it wasn't for the lack of time, Father Song, who had one foot in the grave, might have directly mobilized the entire vulture tail flower village for the sake of the two most important descendants of the Song family. I don't care if it's zombies or monsters, whoever dares to touch my two grandsons, I'll destroy them. Fifth uncle hadn't seen Father Song make such a declaration for more than 10 years. The last time was when Miss Song Ying's parents were assassinated. No one knew who the murderer was, but a month later, the regime of a small country in the world was completely overturned. The top of the aristocratic families had always been a sleeping lion, so don't anger it and wake it up. At this time, in the open space, an armed helicopter directly hovered and then dropped a rope ladder. The three Song brothers hurriedly climbed up. Mr. Songda, long time no see. The one who spoke was an officer in his 30s. Songda didn't make any small talk at this time. Colonel Hani, I'll drink with you next time. Right now, saving people is more important. Have your people brought weapons? Colonel Hani patted his chest and said, Don't worry, His Excellency the General told us to bring 3 armed helicopters and a transport plane. All of them are well-equipped assault team veterans, enough to fight a small battle. Speaking of which, what kind of enemy is Mr. Songda? Songda nodded and said solemnly, In short, be careful, don't be scared later. Colonel Hani had seen this Mr. Songda and his 2 brothers, Mr. Song II and Mr. Song III. It was during a private meeting between Mr. Song and the general. These 3 people directly took down the general's guards in less than a minute. Since then, Colonel Hani, who advocated strength, respected the Song brothers very much. It seems that it's really a bit serious. Colonel Hani nodded and gave the order. The hovering armed helicopters started again and headed towards the manor. What should we do now? Zhong Luoyue had to ask the question first, because she saw that Elizabeth didn't seem to have a lot of opinions. Zhong Luoyue also saw some of Elizabeth's memories, so she knew that Elizabeth was much older than her appearance. But because Elizabeth reduced the need to suck blood by sleeping most of the time, her mental age was probably a little girl of 18 or 19 years old. And most importantly, Elizabeth's grandfather, Amand, who had passed away, made the decision most of the time. As for Luochio, she only knew the name of this mysterious young man, that he was brought by Song Ying, and that he had a mysterious power. Other than that, she couldn't get any more information. But more importantly, Luochio looked like he didn't care about what was going to happen next. Zhong Luoyue had to take the initiative to ask. She said, We naturally had a little intention. We don't need to do anything. Luochio said matter-of-factly, We just need to blend into the crowd and pretend to be onlookers. Yes. Elizabeth nodded quickly, looking very obedient. Why are you nodding? Zhong Luoyue couldn't help but rub her eyebrows. Were these guys with supernatural powers all so willful? Didn't they have to consider the consequences of the matter at all? Luochio looked at Zhong Liu's anxious look and suddenly felt funny. He didn't mean to laugh at her, but just felt that his mood was good at the moment. He was considering whether to erase Zhong Liu's memory of the underground maze, but after thinking about it, he gave up on this idea. Taking advantage of the time, when he was a little more human, he would treat it as giving the Song family some convenience and responding to Father Song's kindness towards him. He believed that this Ms. Zhong would have some scruples when meeting the Song family in many occasions in the future. As for this Ms. Zhong's transformation into another life form, that was naturally something she should worry about. He would pay attention to it occasionally in the future. But just as Zhong Luoyue was sulking about this, Luochio turned around and looked at a collapsed wall. At the same time, Elizabeth seemed to have sensed something and also looked over. Suddenly, a figure came out from behind the wall. The collapse of the manor caused some places to burn, probably because there were many candles used for illumination at that time. In the midst of the flames, a handsome man in a black tuxedo walked out slowly. The moment she saw this handsome man, Elizabeth's face suddenly became ugly with a little fear. She even uneasily grasped the corner of her clothes. This handsome man obviously knew Elizabeth, because he directly called out her name. Elizabeth Arden, what happened to your hunting day? Why did the Fernandez family's castle collapse? In the hunting day you applied for, there was no note saying that you had any other actions, right? Seeing Elizabeth's reaction, Jean Luoyue quickly walked forward and asked in a low voice, "Who is this person?" Elizabeth lowered her head, not daring to look at the handsome man in the eye. She stammered for a moment before she said in a trembling voice, "He is the supervisor of the 13 clans. His name is Ivan. Normally, he is in charge of monitoring those unruly vampires. When necessary, he can directly eliminate them." This woman, the handsome man, Inspector Ivan, stared at Jean Luoyue, sizing her up. A newborn? Who gave her the embrace? The embrace without approval is not allowed. I need an explanation. Elizabeth quickly said, "Master Ivan, he gave Lady Eve the embrace. I think Lady Eve was too excited at that time, so she couldn't suppress her mania." Supervisor Ivan shook his head and said indifferently, "A troublemaker. Where is she now? I remember that in your group, there should be members of the Tekizawa family, the dark merchant Hiddesil, and the last generation of the Isher family, right? Also, I met a few survivors. They said that zombies appeared. What's going on?" Something did happen. Elizabeth looked at Supervisor Ivan with some fear. The participants of Project True Blood had always been cautious, but the 13 clans had strict control over many vampire families. Because she was a mixed blood, Elizabeth's status in the clan was very low. Most of the time, she did not get the pure blood supply she deserved, and the person in charge of this was none other than Supervisor Ivan. This wasn't the first time she had succumbed to the massive faction behind Superintendent Ivan. To Elizabeth, Ivan of the Special Inspector Bureau was like a mountain that pressed down on her and her grandfather's heads. It was suffocating. We'll talk about this later. Supervisor Ivan suddenly looked at Luochio and said indifferently, "I'd better deal with the matter at hand first. What's the background of this man? Although I don't know what you are, you're definitely not one of us. Am I right?" "Master Ivan, he's my friend. I invited him here this time." Elizabeth hurriedly said, Please don't hurt him, okay? I'll tell you everything that happened in the cellar later." Although she knew that Brother Luochio was very powerful and could even destroy the resurrected fourth-generation Viscount Fernandez and even the mutated monsters in Jinwu City, this supervisor represented the 13 clans. The 13 clans had the longest history. Behind each clan, there was a powerful prince. Those were the kings that the vampires couldn't resist at all. "Did I allow you to speak?" The supervisor glared at Elizabeth sharply. Elizabeth's body instantly flew backward and slammed into a wall behind her. Mixed blood, who doesn't know the rules? The supervisor snorted coldly and looked at Luochio again. "Tell me, what do you have to do with this incident?" "It's nothing." Luochio shook his head. "I just happened to pass by. By the way, are you the only one here?" Inspector Ivan furrowed his brows, and for some reason, he suddenly felt a sense of fear. Luochio sighed. "Actually, if it weren't for Miss Karen and Mr. Tu, I think my impression of you would be extremely bad." "Oh, is that so?" Supervisor Ivan narrowed his eyes. "Also, don't you think it's impolite to attack a lady?" Luochio snapped his fingers. Before Ivan could react, he was also sent flying backward. However, he didn't hit the wall. Instead, an invisible wall appeared behind him in an instant. He slammed into the invisible wall, and all the bones in his body broke in an instant. He spat out a mouthful of pus and blood and fell to the ground. Chapter 903. Airport. The man walked in a hurry to the service desk of an airline company. The staff lady sitting here politely showed a professional smile. But in an instant, the staff member's expression became empty. The only impression she had of the man who walked in was his feminine beauty and the pair of beautiful pearl earrings on his ears. "I need the fastest night flight ticket out of here," the feminine and beautiful man quickly said at this time. "Okay, please wait a moment," she responded mechanically. Looking at the staff lady busily operating the keyboard, Hidesir breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't know what would happen in the manor after he left, but there was no doubt that it would attract the attention of the 13 clans. Although they had relaxed a lot in the past few years, the surveillance of his group was still there. Basically, there were inspectors of the 13 clans in every place. These inspectors would directly take action to solve some incidents that caused panic because the vampires couldn't control themselves due to their mania. He remembered that this area was under the watch of an inspector named Ivan. This guy was a young vampire in terms of age, but his bloodline was too good. He was a direct descendant of a prince in the 13 clans. Of course, there were many direct descendants of the princes. Although he was young, there was no doubt that as a direct descendant of a prince, Ivan, who had a pure bloodline, had the ability of the 5th generation afterbirth. He even got the nickname of the peak 5th generation more than 20 years ago. Not to mention such a powerful Ivan. How could Hydesir, who even Karen couldn't defeat, dare to stay? What's more, there was also the unreasonable and terrifying Luaccio. Hydesir naturally knew what to choose. As for whether Project True Blood had failed, for vampires who had a long lifespan, they could just restart the project in a few decades. There were as many research talents as they wanted. After all, the humans in this world were still too easy to tempt. Sir, your ticket is ready. The staff lady pushed out a ticket with a smile. Hydesir showed a more relaxed smile. He picked up the ticket and planned to go through the security check. But the moment he turned around, Hydesir inexplicably felt a chill. It was as if he was being watched by something, as if he was hated by fate. It made him feel as if he was sitting on a carpet of needles. His mind was in a trance, and his fingers directly trembled. What the hell? Hydesir cursed inwardly. Speaking of which, this feeling came and went quickly. However, it disappeared in an instant. His heart finally calmed down, but he didn't dare to stay any longer. He quickly blended into the crowd, passed the security check, and prepared to board the plane. It was indeed a very serious injury. For Ivan Hessenbach, this was the most serious injury he had ever received in his memory, and it happened in an instant. He tried his best to get up, but found that all the bones in his body had been shattered. It was impossible for him to heal himself in a short time. Of course, it didn't mean that he couldn't fight back because his body was seriously injured. Vampires had their own innate abilities. Some were good at speed, some were good at strength, and some were special abilities. For example, he had the very versatile telekinesis. But at this time, just when he wanted to use his telekinesis, his head felt as if it was being pricked by numerous needles. It was very painful. He began to doubt his life. Was it because he hadn't been training recently, or because he hadn't fought in a long time? Or was it because the young man standing in front of him was actually a prince or an old monster of the same level in disguise? Your Excellency is... Ivan Hessenbach, who struggled to stand up, had to reluctantly raise his head at this time. There was a trace of fear in his eyes, and at the same time, there was humiliation. Erex, Luaccio suddenly said. We heard this name. Ivan Hessenbach was stunned. He always felt that he had heard this name somewhere, but he couldn't remember it for a while. Not only Ivan Hessenbach, but Jean-Louis was also slightly startled at this time, but she restrained the surprise on her face in an instant. Although she didn't know why Luaccio said this strange name, it was obvious that he didn't want to reveal his identity. In the face of a transcendent opponent, Jean-Louis felt that she couldn't help much, but if it was just a support, she could. So in an instant, she changed from surprise to horror. It made people think that she was frightened that Luaccio actually said his real name. Then she looked at Ivan Hessenbach worriedly. As for why Elisabeth, she had just got up from the ground at this moment, so she didn't hear Luaccio's self-introduction. I remember, Your Excellency Erex. Ivan Hessenbach had recovered a little at this time. It had to be said that his self-healing ability was better than Karen's. He could barely stand up with all his bones broken, but his scruples at this time had become more serious. I've heard of your name, the Great Erex. Ivan Hessenbach adjusted his breathing at this time. I heard from the prince of my family. Really? Luaccio nodded. Anyway, Luaccio didn't know whether Erex and the prince mentioned by the supervisor knew each other. But at this time, those who didn't know each other pretended to know each other, and those who knew each other. Anyway, no one knew each other, so he just nodded. I'm sorry for offending you. Your Excellency Erex. At this moment, Ivan Hessenbach appeared even more humble because he began to recall some legendary figures that the 13 clans had no choice but to give way to. For example, the prince of his family occasionally mentioned the last dream-eating tapir in the world, Erex. He could control dreams, devour dreams, and appear and disappear mysteriously, making people unable to distinguish between dreams and reality at all. It was said that Erex had even eaten the dreams of the prince of the 13 families, but after so many years, the prince still didn't say a word. Oh, it's okay. I'm a bit emotional these 2 days. Luaccio shook his head. Ivan Hessenbach had an impulse to vomit blood for such an answer. What the hell was emotional? And it was these 2 days. Ivan Hessenbach decided to ignore this remark, and then asked tentatively, Your Excellency Erex, may I know why you're here? I was invited to participate in the activities here. And then something happened in the middle. Well, it's okay now. Luaccio smiled slightly. Ivan Hessenbach always felt that this smile made him shudder. He remembered what Elizabeth said, and said, I didn't expect Elizabeth to be your friend, Your Excellency Erex. I'm here to solemnly apologize for my rudeness. Elizabeth, I'm sorry for hurting you. I'll send someone to send you 10 years' worth of pure blood later as compensation. So much. Elizabeth opened her mouth in surprise. She used to use half a year's supply, but now it was 3 years' worth. Many times, she even had to ask the dark merchant Heideseer for help. This sudden increase of 10 years' worth made her feel like she had become rich overnight. Damn mixed blood. Ivan Hessenbach didn't express his thoughts, but his attitude became more and more friendly. Smart people knew how to judge the situation. He thought it was best to give in at this time to save himself. Knowing that he couldn't beat Erex, he still wanted to use his parents to pressure Erex to save his face. It was the most stupid behavior, but there was no doubt that he had completely remembered the name Erex. He did not feel that the other party was deceiving him, because in his opinion, the strong would never bother to deceive others. My name will scare you to death. My name represents my will. This was probably the mentality of the strong. Ivan Hessenbach looked at Elizabeth with a smile, thinking that she was really lucky. He recalled how Elizabeth had been nervous at the beginning, claiming that the other party was her friend and hoping that they would let the other party go. Perhaps this despicable mixed blood still did not know how the friend she knew could make the princes of the 13 families feel fear. At this moment in Ivan Hessenbach's mind, he couldn't help but fill in the picture. This despicable mixed blood, without knowing it, somehow won the favor of this strong. So she was lucky enough to get a strong backing, but she still didn't know the situation. In addition, as long as this horrible nightmare eating tapir is here, I'm afraid there's no chance to continue investigating this incident. Ivan Hessenbach quickly made up his mind. I remember, there's still a very important thing to do. He obviously recovered a little from his injuries, and now he was calm. Elizabeth, if you see Lady Eve, ask her to go back to the clan as soon as possible to explain this illegal embrace. As for this newborn, you'll take care of it for the time being. Without waiting for Elizabeth to react, Ivan Hessenbach hastily bade farewell to Sir Erex before transforming into a bat and flying into the night. He probably thought a lot of strange things just now. Jean Louis wasn't very clear about the things in the vampire world, but she was obviously very familiar with weighing the pros and cons, and even more clear about the reason for his change of attitude towards Elizabeth. Maybe he's a very active person, Luaccio said casually. At this time, a rumbling sound came from afar. Looking up, it was a few helicopters flying in the dark. Luaccio suddenly said, Let's stick to the original plan. What plan? Jean Louis was stunned for a moment, but quickly reacted. What was the original plan that Luaccio was talking about? Pretend that they didn't know anything, and then blend into the crowd to be a quiet onlooker. What kind of plan was this? Gan Hong was the first to wake up. She felt that her head was a little dizzy. She actually had this feeling recently, but she couldn't remember where it was. Oh yes, she fell asleep inexplicably. And she wasn't the only one who fell asleep. It was dark all around, with only some light from the fire. Gan Hong looked up at the night sky above her head and was stunned for a few seconds. She jumped up in an instant and then glanced around. She was still in a room in the afternoon, but now she could see the night sky in this room. The surroundings had completely turned into ruins, but everything in this room was still intact, except for the ceiling and everything on the ceiling. Missing. Gan Hong suddenly quivered, only to see Song Ying lying on the sofa next to her, motionless. Gan Hong hurriedly walked over, anxiously shaking Song Ying's shoulder. Hong! Song Ying opened her eyes dizzily, and her consciousness was confused. What's wrong? It's good that you're okay, Missing. Gan Hong regained her calmness, and then quickly walked to Luochio's side. Song Ying looked over in confusion, only to see Luochio sitting on the single-seater sofa, with his head lowered, as if he had fallen asleep. What happened? Song Ying began to notice her situation at the moment. This was like the scene after an earthquake. Master Chiu, Master Chiu, Master Chiu. Gan Hong anxiously called in front of Luochio. Song Ying glanced at him, and then turned her head, wanting to wake up her secretary, Su Mei. Master Chiu, Master Chiu, Master Chiu. But no matter how Gan Hong called, she couldn't wake Luochio up. Gan Hong was so shocked that she quickly grabbed Luochio's wrist and felt that there was still a pulse on it. Only then did she feel slightly relieved. Song Ying looked up at the sky. The reason he was looking up at the sky was because a strong light was sweeping down from above. He saw an armed helicopter slowly approaching, and the side door of the helicopter was already open. Sonda grabbed the door with one hand and stuck his whole body out. All right, we've finally found Missing. Thank God. With that, Sonda directly jumped down from above. The helicopter was at least 4 or 5 stories high, but Sonda jumped down without hesitation. Of course, the moment he landed, he looked a little embarrassed. Sonda quickly rushed to the wreckage of the room where they were and looked at Song Ying with concern. Missing, it's great that you're okay. Songda? Song Ying was stunned. Why are you here? Songda said at this time. Missing, it's very dangerous here. Let's leave here first. And how's our new master? Instructor Song. Gan Hong respectfully called and hurriedly said, I don't know how Master Chiu is. I can't wake him up. It seems that he's completely unconscious, but his breathing and pulse are normal, and there's no sign of poisoning. Gan Hong, come and give me a hand. Songda nodded and hurriedly asked people to lower the rescue rope from the helicopter. Several people worked together to hoist Luochio up. More rescue people began to rush over from the nearby city. It was impossible to excavate at present, so they could only rescue some injured people who escaped from the castle when it collapsed. The sound of sirens could be heard far away. Even the vineyard of the manor, it could be faintly heard. Luochio raised his head and glanced at the armed helicopter that hurriedly flew away, and then no longer paid attention to it. His body double was unconscious on the helicopter, which could save a lot of trouble. At this time, he was sitting quietly under a grape trellis in the vineyard. This was the place where he played chess with 2 shinny disguised by Karen Isher during the day. In front of him were Red Spider Lily and Sansheng. As for the other Daylily series, as well as the notebook, he casually put them aside. Luochio, who was sitting quietly, closed his eyes. After a long time, he slowly picked up the Red Spider Lily. His hand holding the cup hesitated and stopped in the air. But in the end, he drank the Red Spider Lily in the cup and then continued to sit quietly. Legend has it that if you drink the Red Spider Lily, you can see your beloved on the other side. The wind blew gently, and the insects chirped. After a long time, Luochio slowly opened his eyes. There was a lonely smile on his face. He looked up at the Big Dipper in the night sky and remembered that his father taught him to use the Big Dipper to find the direction when he was a child. Red Spider Lily, the flowers blooming on the other side. Each of them condensed the thoughts of the dead. Under the grape trellis, Luochio stared at the night sky. After a long time, he slowly turned around. He didn't know when, but there was a beautiful woman quietly waiting here. Master, it was Miss Maid of the club. Luochio looked at Yi. He didn't call her, but he wouldn't resist her sudden appearance. Luochio just said gently, You are here. Miss Maid said softly at this time, I cleaned the house, and there are no guests for the time being. And the grapes you sent me are a bit special, so I want to come over and pick some for later use. With that, Yu looked around and smiled. Master seems to have encountered a lot of interesting things. Luochio suddenly came forward, took Yuye's hand and sat down, smiling. Do you want to listen? She nodded. He met her on Christmas Day, 1990. Luochio sorted out his thoughts and slowly told the story of Karen and Tushini. Yi wouldn't interrupt her master's narration. She just listened quietly and then opened the notebook that recorded the manufacturing method of the Daylily series from time to time. On this day, he and she were buried here. In the end, Luochio used burial to end the story. Yi put down a plate in front of Luochio at this time. She took the plate from the club, and on the plate were peeled grapes. They were stacked one by one, like round and crystal gems. Is it too boring? Luochio looked at these peeled grapes with amusement, picked up one, and put it in his mouth to taste. Yi shook her head, then said worriedly, I just thought that master hasn't had dinner. Are you hungry? The taste of these grapes is very special. Luochio couldn't help tasting one more. Yi then said, because these are blood grapes growing on the edge of the underworld, the taste is naturally different from ordinary ones. But these here should not be the original blood grapes. The person who planted them should have gotten the seeds from somewhere and cultivated them in a way suitable for the human world, but the effect is much weaker. Seeds on the edge of the underworld. Luochio nodded thoughtfully. He remembered the identity of Haidasir, the dark merchant. Perhaps Tushini got it from Haidasir. According to the information recorded in the Daylily series notebook, the raw material of the semi-finished red spider lily, and so on, was the grapes here. This winemaker is really a genius. Yi said softly at this time. It's a pity that I don't have a chance to meet him. Luochio showed a curious look. He knew that Yi would not praise him as a genius just because of the Daylily series itself, because she was an almost omnipotent genius herself. Yi took all the Daylily series and began to slide her fingers across Tushini's notebook. Then, she picked up the samples of the Daylily series that Luochio took and mixed them little by little. Finally, she squeezed out the juice from the grapes here and soaked it in the sanshing fragments. Not long after, she finally put it in. The materials are all ready-made. It's much more convenient. Yi said softly, it's a pity that he mixed the wrong proportion at the end. That's why the final product of the Daylily series, the legendary 7th Daylily, turned into a strange evolution potion. But in fact, according to the correct proportions, the final product should be this. Miraculously, all the Daylily series, after Yuye's mixing, was no longer the original color. It was like clear water, but exuded a unique fragrance. Luochio picked up the finished product curiously. What is this? Miss Maid smiled at this time. Mengpa, or should I say, the prototype of Mengpa. Mengpa. Luochio was startled. Mengpa soup? Yi said, I think if there is real blood, it should not be a substitute, but Mengpa. If you even forget that you're a vampire, you probably don't need to suck blood anymore. The power of forgetfulness will make the instinct be forgotten. With that, Miss Maid suddenly stood up. She gently stroked the entangled grapevines and sang softly. This was the first time that Luochio heard Yuye's singing. It was not a gorgeous song. Lien, you and I agreed to meet for 100 years. If anyone dies at the age of 97, I will wait for 3 years on the bridge of helplessness. Lien, you and I agreed to meet for 100 years. Falling in love, waiting for 1,000 years on the bridge of helplessness. Lien, you and I agreed to meet for 100 years. Not afraid of falling into the reincarnation forever, only willing to love forever. Lien, you and I agreed to meet for 100 years. Not envious of the endless happiness in the Western paradise, only envious of the Mandarin ducks, not the immortals. In the midst of the song, a flickering flash butterfly of the goddess of light flew across the night sky, dancing and circling in the air by itself. Not long after, from the direction of the castle ruins, another flash butterfly of the goddess of light flew over. They intertwined and circled each other like intimate lovers, and then flew away. Chapter 904. We found you in the ruins. You were in a coma at that time. Later, the rescue team sent you to the hospital. Sir, you were so lucky. You only hurt your leg. You can recover after a period of rest. After Ouyang Jie woke up, he saw that the nurse in the hospital told him a lot. However, when he heard that the castle collapsed and a large number of guests were buried alive in the cellar, he was extremely excited. He couldn't calm down. His master, Uncle Jean, who was like half a father to him, all of these left him overnight, and even Jean Luoyue. He could not contact his master, nor could he contact Uncle Jean. Fortunately, he managed to get through to Jean Luoyue. Ajay, listen to me. Wait for me to come to you. I am also in the hospital. This was Jean Liue's words. Later, the rescue team arrived and sent a large number of wounded people to the nearest hospital. Jean Luoyue, who successfully mixed into the crowd, was naturally sent to the hospital together with them. A lot of things happened. Before entering the large ward where Ouyang Jie was, Jean Luoyue thought so. Later, when mixed into the crowd, Luochio disappeared from her and Elizabeth's eyes without being noticed. But later, she heard that a young man was sent to the hospital by helicopter and was now in a high-end single ward. Jean Luoyue guessed that the young man was probably Luochio, who also mixed into the crowd. She couldn't go to that place because Jean Luoyue could see a lot of guard from a distance. She guessed that they were the people of the Song family. Later, she received a call from Ouyang Jie. She felt somewhat lucky because she wasn't sure whether Ouyang Jie had safely escaped from the collapse. Even because of something, she didn't know whether Ouyang Jie knew everything behind Uncle Jean. What was interesting was that Jean Luoyue found out that the people who had covered for her when she went to the manor and sent her to the hospital were also in this hospital. She had already contacted them. With some familiar people by her side, Jean Luoyue finally felt a sense of security. You guys wait for me outside. I'll go in and see Mr. Ouyang myself. At this time, Jean Luoyue ordered several bodyguards who were only slightly injured. She sorted out some of her thoughts and walked into the big ward. Many of the victims of the disaster were also here. In fact, the number of people who were injured was far more than those in this large ward. However, many of them only suffered minor injuries and were only bandaged and examined outside. Jean Luoyue soon found Ouyang Jie on one of the beds. At this moment, his expression was haggard. He sat with his head lowered, but his fingers kept fiddling with his phone. It seemed that he was anxious. Fortunately, you're fine. Jean Luoyue slowly walked in front of Ouyang Jie. He raised his head and saw that Jean Luoyue had drawn the curtains around the bed, creating a relatively private space for the bed. Jean Luoyue moved a chair over and sat down. Luoyue, Ouyang Jie called out with concern. Jean Luoyue only shook her head. I'm fine. The doctor said I was just a little frightened. That's good. Ouyang Jie nodded, then quickly asked, What happened? My master and the others really? Jean Luoyue still shook her head. I'm not sure what happened. At the wine tasting in the cellar, I waited for you for some time, but I didn't see you. Later, I felt a little tired, so I came up. I wanted to look for you, but at this time, the castle suddenly collapsed. Not only Ouyang Jie, she also said the same thing to the people who came to investigate. Jean Luoyue already had a plan for everything that happened in the cellar. She would never reveal anything to the outside world. This was the Song family's territory. If they wanted to find trouble, let the Song family and the local government do it. As long as they excavated, the zombie corpses under the castle will be found sooner or later. How could this happen? Ouyang Jie painfully grasped his hair. It shouldn't have collapsed. It was repaired a few years ago. How could it suddenly collapse? We can only wait for the various experts to investigate. Jean Luoyue sighed, then suddenly said, By the way, where did you go at that time? Ouyang Jie subconsciously said, I went to the study to wait for my master, but I didn't wait. Later, Uncle Jean came to talk to me for a while. I drank a glass of wine. Then I don't know how I fell asleep. Your alcohol tolerance is not bad. Is there a problem with that glass of wine? Jean Luoyue asked tentatively. Ouyang Jie hurriedly said, Uncle Jean is like a son to me. He won't harm me, and there is no reason for him to put drugs in the wine. I think it's probably because of the time difference, so I was really tired. But he looked confused. Jean Luoyue didn't know whether he could convince himself with such a reason. No, I have to find my master and Uncle Jean. They're the only two relatives I have left. Ouyang Jie's expression suddenly became agitated. He struggled to get out of bed. As his leg was injured, he fell to the ground as soon as his feet touched the ground, which affected the wound. Ouyang Jie couldn't help uttering a scream. The nurse outside the curtain heard the sound and hurriedly came in. She helped Ouyang Jie to the bed with Zhong Luoyue. "Sir, you can't get out of bed now. Please take care of your body, okay?" The nurse's voice was like a reproach. Zhong Luoyue sighed at this time, then glanced at the wound on Ouyang Jie's leg. The wound on the knee was ruptured. At this time, the blood spread out from the gauze and dyed it red. Zhong Luoyue looked at the bright red, suddenly a little absent-minded. Her heart was itchy, and in an instant she even had a feeling of hunger. She also seemed to have lost her hearing at this moment. She could only hear a buzzing sound reverberating in her head. Zhong Luoyue shuddered all of a sudden. He felt his body turn cold. "No, let me get out of bed. I want to go find my master and the others." Ouyang Jie still insisted at this moment. Zhong Luoyue took a deep breath. "Ajay, you stay here to recuperate. I'll follow up on your master and the others. Maybe they're just trapped down there. It's not necessarily the worst result. Don't worry, I'll inform you as soon as there's news." Luoyue. At this time, he only trusted her. His emotions began to slowly calm down. Zhong Luoyue comforted him a little more, then said that she was going to see the bodyguards who were injured in the car accident and sent to the hospital. She made an excuse and left. Ouyang Jie was very reluctant to leave, but he didn't have a reason to ask her to stay. He could only nod silently. The moment she lifted the curtain and went out, Zhong Luoyue looked back at Ouyang Jie. Looking at his expression, Zhong Luoyue guessed that Ouyang Jie probably didn't know the truth behind the castle, or even something very important to him. She, Karen Isher, and the others had entered Jinwu City's memories. When she left, those memories of Jinwu City surged out chaotically like a merry-go-round. Zhong Luoyue discovered some secrets. That was, Ouyang Jie was very likely to be Jinwu City's illegitimate son. This was her inference from the memories of Jinwu City, often hiding in the room to look at a photo. The photo was of a woman, but this woman's appearance reminded her of Ouyang Jie. Jinwu City's extraordinary concern for Ouyang Jie, and so on. But if Ouyang Jie was really Jinwu City's illegitimate son, why did Jinwu City abandon him and let him enter the castle to become Tu Shini's disciple? She didn't know the reason. "Leave one person here to watch over Mr. Ouyang and see if he needs anything." Zhong Luoyue ordered the bodyguard outside the big ward and quickly left. She still planned to see someone. This was probably the best single ward in the hospital. It was so luxurious that it could even be called a star hotel. In the ward, Father Song sat quietly on the sofa with his eyes closed, while Song Ing silently held his arm. Gan Hong and fifth uncle stood side by side, not daring to speak. There were still the elites of the Song family outside the door, as well as the three Song brothers who rushed over after bandaging the wound. The doctor said that there was nothing wrong with the patient, and there were no visible injuries on his body. After a magnetic resonance examination, there were no hidden injuries. The reason for his coma was not clear, but the patient's physical condition was good. However, the fact that he didn't wake up made old Master Song very unhappy. In fact, several neurologists had been invited from all over the country and were on their way. Fifth uncle's phone suddenly rang. After he picked it up, he hurriedly whispered in Father's ear, "Master, eldest young master has rushed over from the village with Mr. Blind. He said that he will arrive at the hospital in half an hour." Song Howren was gathering people in the village and preparing to return to China. After Father received Song Howren's letter, he immediately notified Song Howren. Calculating the time, if they had set off at that time, they should have been back by now. "Okay, I see." At this time, Song Tianyu opened his eyes and looked at Luochio on the bed. He suddenly said, "Old Five, did Luochio's eyes move just now?" They glanced at each other and secretly shook their heads. This was probably just an illusion caused by Father Song's ardent expectations. Father Song sighed inwardly and stood up. He ordered, "Old Five, Gan Hong, stay here and watch over him. Xiaoying, accompany Grandpa for a walk." Song Ying nodded and helped Song Tianyu to stand up. When they walked out of the door, the three Song brothers hurriedly came forward. Song Tianyu waved his hand and then said in a low voice, "You guys come with me too. Tell me everything in detail." The three Song brothers nodded. The group of people went to a pavilion in the small courtyard downstairs of the inpatient department and sat down. Song Air and Song San stood guard outside the pavilion, while Song Da tirelessly recounted everything that happened today. He started with the giant roulette wheel at the wine tasting party, how Song Da beat Lady Eve to death, and how he finally discovered the treasure trove and the secret passage, and how he escaped with his life. Really, for Song Ying, what Song Da told her was undoubtedly like something out of fantasy story. Her face was full of disbelief. Of course. Song Da nodded solemnly and then took out his phone. Old 3 took this video after the roulette wheel started. Although it's very short, it captured the whole process of that blood-sucking monster killing people. Song Da placed the phone on the table so that Father Song and Song Ying could see it. Even with Father Song's decades of experience, he was moved when he saw the leech-like monster sucking people dry in the video. Song Ying was even more frightened. This naturally wasn't a clip from a movie, but something that really happened. Oh my God. Song Ying opened her mouth. She shuddered when she thought about how she was in the castle when this terrifying thing happened, and couldn't help but hug her arms tightly. Missing, there's still many things in this world that we can't explain. Song Da said indifferently, just like the internal martial arts that we martial artists cultivate. To ordinary people, it's already inconceivable. But in our eyes, this world is much bigger than what you see. Song Ying wanted to say something, but she didn't know what to say. In the end, she just shook her head. If this group of monsters is really causing trouble, then is it possible that Luochio's current coma is actually caused by these monsters? Song Tianyu suddenly asked. Song Da shook his head, indicating that he didn't know. But Song Da clearly understood that while he was shocked by this supernatural event, old Master Song was still concerned about this young Master Luochio. This young fellow's position in old Master Song's heart was really astonishing. Song Da might look like a burly man, but his thoughts were as deep as dust. He should be fine. Maybe he just inhaled too much of the mandala flower scent. Suddenly, a low and deep figure came from outside the pavilion, alarming the three Song brothers at the same time. They instantly looked over and saw two people walking side by side in the night. The one on the left was the cynical Song Howren, and the one on the right was a very young man. He looked to be about 25 or 26 years old, but his hair was gray. His eyes were closed, and there was a red between his eyebrows. He was wearing a traditional Chinese robe and cloth shoes. He walked slowly and occasionally coughed a few times, giving off a sickly feeling. But even though his eyes were closed, he seemed to be able to see. When he moved, he didn't look like a blind person at all. "Blind man." Song Da stood up and said warmly, "You're finally here, Mr. Blind." Unlike Song Da's enthusiasm, Song Tianyu was very respectful. He even stood up to welcome him. "You're here." The reason why old Master Song was respectful was partly because this Mr. Blind was really an extraordinary person, and also because of his age. Mr. Blind was actually over 100 years old, so he was worthy of old Master Song's respect. "Greetings, old Master Song." Mr. Blind walked slowly to the pavilion and cupped his fist towards Song Tianyu, giving off a good impression. Yin 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 yin. Chapter 905. Greetings, Master Song. After Mr. Blind greeted him, Father Song nodded at Song Howren and asked with concern, "Mr. Blind, you just said that it was because he inhaled a lot of Dachira flowers. How did you know?" Song Howren explained, "It's like this. Actually, before we came to the hospital, we took a detour to the collapsed castle to take a look. Well, Mr. Blind requested it. He said that if there really were zombies and blood-sucking monsters, it would be very dangerous and difficult for ordinary people to deal with." Indeed, Song Da smiled bitterly. "I lost half my life and barely managed to kill one with the advantage of being underground. If it was an open space, I would definitely be the one to die." Mr. Blind said indifferently, "Fortunately, it was you who practiced martial arts. If it were Song Air or Song San, even with the advantage of the terrain, I'm afraid it would point to disaster. Father Song asked at this time, Mister, what did you find out? Mr. Blind's expression was a bit grave. That place emitted a lot of death energy. I had Howard describe the surrounding terrain and found that the castle was a naturally formed place, very suitable for raising living corpses. If it was in the hands of some people in China's Xiangjiang, it would be a treasure land for refining corpses. Therefore, it's not strange for zombies to appear. After a pause, Mr. Blind continued, However, the castle has already collapsed. Even if there's zombies, I'm afraid they're buried deep underground and won't be able to come out in a short time. But I suggest that it's best not to let the government dig casually. Once there are signs of zombies and it spreads, I'm afraid it'll be a disaster. I understand. I'll immediately contact them and have them stop digging for the time being. Song Tianyu nodded. This place was the Song family's headquarters. If a terrifying wave of zombies broke out, the Song family would be the first to bear the brunt of it. During the day, the yang energy is strong, so the zombie's strength will be weakened. Mr. Blind said at this time, Tomorrow, I'll go investigate carefully. Master Song, please give me some people. No problem. Mr. Blind, how many people do you need? Just let Howard know. Father Song readily agreed. In addition, before I came here, I did a rough investigation and found that there are many petals of the Dachira flower in the castle, and there are also remnants of their scent. At this moment, Mr. Blind added, This kind of Dachira flower is different from the common ones. It has a bit of hallucinogenic properties. It can cause people to hallucinate, and in serious cases, it can cause people to fall into a coma. I think that since the new young master of the Song family has no external injuries, it must be because of this flower. Is there a way to save him? Father Song quickly asked. Mr. Blind said indifferently, It's nothing serious. Perhaps he'll wake up after sleeping for a day or two. Otherwise, I can prescribe some Chinese medicine to refresh the mind and boil it to drink. You should be fine. Song Ying's phone suddenly rang. She quickly picked it up and said, Grandfather, fifth uncle said that Luochio has woken up. Then, Song Ying muttered softly, Didn't you say you were going to sleep for a day or two? Everyone's physique is different. Mr. Blind looked at Song Ying. It's not strange for people with good physiques to wake up early. Missing, you worry too much. Song Ying glanced at her grandfather in embarrassment, but Father Song didn't say anything. Instead, he clearly breathed a sigh of relief. Tell old Five that I'll go up and take a look later. Song Ying stuck out her tongue. At this moment, Song Tianyu suddenly said, How about this? You go up and wait for me. I have something to discuss with Mr. Blind. Song Ying didn't insist on staying. She nodded and quickly left. After that, Song Tianyu looked at Song Howard and said, Howard, leave the people I asked you to pick here first. We might have to postpone our plan to return to China. Do your best to assist Mr. in investigating this matter. This is the Song family's headquarters. We can't let anything go wrong here. Do you understand? Understood. Song Howard nodded solemnly. Mister, I have something to discuss with you in private. Song Tianyu looked at Mr. Blind and asked softly, Can you listen? Sure. Song Ying didn't immediately return to Luochio's ward. Instead, she looked around and saw that no one was following her. She put on her sunglasses and suddenly went to the back stairwell. Not long after, a nurse quietly opened the door and met up with Song Ying here. The nurse looked a little nervous. After seeing Song Ying, she took out a test tube from her uniform. No one saw it, right? Song Ying stared at the nurse and asked. The nurse quickly said, No. As per your instructions, I secretly took it out when the patient's blood was drawn for testing. Are you sure? Song Ying asked in a deep voice. Absolutely not. Okay. Song Ying nodded. Go back and do your work. I'll get someone to send the money to you later. Remember, no one else is allowed to know about this. Otherwise, you would have known. Miss Song, don't worry. I won't tell anyone. After that, the nurse left carefully. Song Ying looked at the test tube in her hand. It contained Luochio's blood. It's not that I don't trust Uncle's ability, Song Ying muttered at this time. But after all, it's related to the future of the Song family. I have to verify it myself. If you are really from the Song family, I will. Song Ying couldn't say what she would do. Finally, she pouted her lips and said, At most, I will treat you better. She put the test tube in her pocket and went to a department in the hospital. Then, she quickly walked out and hummed a song happily, walking to the VIP ward area. Unfortunately, Song Ying's good mood didn't last long, because after a while, she met a very annoying woman, as Song Ying's sworn enemy and senior, Zhong Luoyue. As the saying goes, when enemies meet, their eyes turn red. Song Ying glanced at Zhong Luoyue's embarrassed appearance at this time and suddenly frowned, because she saw that Zhong Luoyue was holding a coat in her hand. It should be the one worn by Luochio. The reason why she couldn't be wrong was that this coat was chosen by Song Ying herself. When did this coat come to Zhong Luoyue's hands? It's strange. Also, this damn woman took this road. Is she also going to see Luochio? They met at the corner of the corridor, and then, without a word, each turned down the same road. Congratulations, I didn't bury you. Congratulations, Song Ying said with a fake smile. Zhong Luoyue didn't fall into a disadvantage. She smiled and said, yes. In fact, I also went to the gate of hell, but Yama told me that some scourges are still alive. A good person like me should live longer, so he sent me back. Song Ying laughed happily. I'm afraid this king of hell is blind. Who knows? Zhong Luoyue also smiled. Anyway, I didn't wear sunglasses. So sneaky. Song Ying shrugged and took off her sunglasses indifferently. Then she said casually, do you have a friend here? Yes. Zhong Luoyue suddenly handed over the coat in her hand. She lowered her head and said shyly, please help me return this coat to my friend. Looking at the situation, I don't think I can get in. By the way, help me pass a message saying that the time spent with him is too exciting. It's unforgettable and my blood is boiling. Song Ying was stunned. Zhong Luoyue had already stuffed the coat to Song Ying and left with her. Exciting? Unforgettable? Blood boiling? Hey, what do you mean by unforgettable? Make it clear. Zhong Luoyue, come back. Song Ying chased and asked. Come back. Zhong Luoyue just waved her hand casually with her back facing Song Ying. Damn vixen. Song Ying took the coat and slammed it on the wall. Song Ying was probably in a bad mood, but Zhong Luoyue was in a good mood. This was the happiest time of the day. She even had a feeling of returning to the normal world. But she knew that this feeling was just an illusion, because on the way out, she happened to meet someone she knew. It was Natasha, who had formed a temporary team with her in the maze cellar and then disappeared. At this time, Natasha looked like she had lost her soul. Her head was lowered, and no one knew what she was thinking. Perhaps it was because she was too absent-minded, but she did not react in time and was knocked to the ground by a nurse who was pushing an emergency bed from behind. Miss, do you know her? The bodyguard next to her asked. Zhong Luoyue shook her head, turned around, and said indifferently, I don't know her, but I met her in the castle. Let's go, I'm a little tired. She passed by Natasha in this way. Natasha, who had been knocked to the ground, was helped up by someone. She was still in a daze, but she quickly left with the emergency bed. What happened? Natasha's mind was in a mess. When she woke up, she found herself in the hospital. It was said that she was found under the rubble and was unconscious at that time. After waking up, Natasha found that she was really safe. She immediately felt relieved. But everything that happened in the castle was so clear, which made Natasha terrified. Then, Natasha found something that made her very afraid. That was, the survivors who were treated with her seemed to have forgotten what happened in the cellar. There were no more survivors. Including her, it seemed that there were only 5 survivors who were found. But these 4 people had forgotten what happened in the maze. Natasha didn't dare to tell the truth, because she vaguely felt that there seemed to be a pair of invisible hands behind her, manipulating everything. The doctor suggested that she stay in the hospital for observation for a few days, and Natasha was willing to stay in such a crowded place. She was planning to pretend that she didn't know what happened if the survivors in the hospital couldn't remember anything in the next few days. She didn't want to involve herself in such a horrible thing again. Natasha stood in the same place for a while. Still feeling a little dizzy, she planned to go to the bathroom to wash her face. It was already 2 o'clock in the morning. There were not many people in the inpatient department of the hospital. In the bathroom, Natasha began to tear off the tape on her face in front of the mirror. Her face should be bruised. Natasha remembered that she fell on the ground in the maze. Her arm was bandaged at this time. Natasha didn't know when she got hurt, but the nurse who bandaged her told her that the wound was quite deep, a bit like a scratch. She carefully leaned in front of the mirror and began to slowly tear off the tape on her face to prevent it from getting wet when she washed her face. However, when the tape was slowly torn off, Natasha was suddenly shocked. The wound on her face had begun to rot. She found that her lips were purple, and there was a touch of blood at the bottom of her eyes. But her face was pale, like a corpse. Natasha approached the mirror again in fear. She opened her eyelids with her fingers, only to see the horrifying congested state in her eyeballs. She was more frightened and suddenly collapsed on the ground. Natasha's whole body was trembling, suddenly cold and suddenly hot, and suddenly became difficult to breathe. She seemed to remember something and quickly took off the bandage on her arm. She saw that her arm was rotten at this time. She was frightened and wanted to ask for help. "Doctor," she shouted in fear, but at this time, a hot thing was spat out from her throat. That was her blood, spat out from her body. Her teeth, her lips, were now covered with blood. She looked at the blood on her hand in horror. Her body suddenly twitched and fell to the ground. At this time, a cleaner opened the door of the washroom and saw Natasha lying on the ground. Miss, are you okay?" The cleaner was shocked and quickly came to check. But at this time, Natasha suddenly sat up, her eyes turned white, and saw the cleaner. She instantly opened her mouth and bit him. When Song Ying pushed open the door of this VIP ward, she happened to see Gan Hong holding a cup and feeding Luochio water. Miss Song Ying, who was not in a good mood, directly straightened her face at this time. Looking at his Mrs. appearance, Uncle Wu wondered why her face suddenly changed. But as an experienced butler, Uncle Wu said very cleverly, "Master Chiu, I'll go and see if the doctor is here. It's strange. Why hasn't he come yet?" "Thank you." Luochio nodded. Luochio had to pretend to be a patient. If he woke up alive and well, it would probably arouse suspicion. Therefore, Luochio cooperated with Gan Hong and Uncle Wu's care. Song Ying frowned and came to the front of the bed, sat down and crossed her legs. "Tell me, what happened?" "What happened?" Luochio asked curiously. Song Ying said discontentedly, "Don't ask when you already know the answer. I tell you, it was you who told us to go to that room to wait for Tushini. What happened? Why did we all pass out?" At this time, Luochio looked at Gan Hong in confusion. He looked very innocent. At this time, Gan Hong whispered in Song Ying's ear, "Missing, Master Chiu forgot what happened after he woke up. He only remembered what happened before playing chess with Mr. Tu in the vineyard." So Song Ying looked at Luochio in astonishment, blinking her eyes. Luochio looked at Song Ying's eyes, blinking his eyes. "So what happened?" "You're pretending," Song Ying roared at this time. Chapter 906. Song Tianyu and Mr. Blind walked side by side on a small path in the recuperation area of the hospital. Behind them, the Song brothers and Song Howren followed at a distance of 6 to 7 meters. Even with Song Howren's extraordinary perception and the Song brothers' senses as martial artists, they were unable to hear the conversation between Song Tianyu and Mr. Blind. They knew that this was Mr. Blind's method. Even if they were face to face, if Mr. Blind did not wish for others to hear, no one would be able to hear it. "Old Master Song, are you worried because of the chaos caused by the zombies in the ancient castle?" Song Tianyu glanced at Mr. Blind and shook his head. "With you around, why would I be afraid of evil? I'm just thinking about something else." Mr. Blind said, "What is it?" Song Tianyu stopped and looked at the stars in the distance. "Mister, do you remember our meeting?" Mr. Blind nodded. "Of course I remember. Back then, old Master Song was being hunted down in Nanyang. I happened to be wandering around." Song Tianyu still felt that. "If not for you saving me, I'm afraid I would never be able to leave Nanyang, much less build up the foundation of the Song family in this foreign country. I will never forget Sir's kindness to me. That's why I set up a family rule. All descendants of the Song family must respect you as they respect me." "There's no need for that," Mr. Blind said indifferently. "I've already accepted the offerings of the Song family. We can just take what we need." Song Tianyu only smiled and did not continue the topic. Instead, he suddenly looked at a tiny star in the sky and said, "You once said that I have the star energy of the North Star. Do you remember?" Mr. Blind said, "The Song family was originally a descendant of the royal family. Song Taizu was once the son of Shinryu, recognized by the heavens and earth. Even though the dynasty changed, the dragon energy of the land of China still blesses the descendants. Although the Song family has been through a lot of hardships, it has never been destroyed. The dragon energy of the land is a very mysterious fate. After a long period of hardships, it will break out of its cocoon and become a butterfly. After a few cycles, it will definitely give birth to a rich and noble person. Old Master Song, you are that person." Song Tanyu suddenly sighed and said worriedly, "What will happen to the Song family after I die?" Mr. Blind said, "Miss Song Ying is blessed with wealth. She will have no worries for the rest of her life. As for young Master Song's talent, he has his own opportunities. You don't have to worry. What about the descendants of my elder brother?" Song Tanyu suddenly asked. "All these years, I have been painstakingly searching for news of my elder brother and his descendants. It was only because Mr. told me that my elder brother's bloodline had not been cut off that I persevered. But more than a year ago, you told me that fate was in chaos. You could no longer divine the existence of that descendant. I was in despair several times." Mr. Blind said, "This humble one is still unable to divine his existence to this day. Whether he exists or doesn't exist, to say nothing of fate, even the slightest trace of his existence is incomparably obscure to the mysteries of heaven." "Sir, you mean we may have found the wrong person?" Song Tianyu frowned. Mr. Blind shook his head and said, "Not necessarily. Fate and the mysteries of the heavens were illusory things. On the contrary, modern science had its merits. What could be proven by science, ancient methods might not be able to. And recently, the Song clan's luck has suddenly increased greatly for some reason, vaguely being protected by the power of heaven and earth. I reckon that it should be the return of the descendant of Master Song's elder brother." "Power of heaven and earth?" Song Tianyu was taken aback. Mr. Blind fell silent for a moment before saying in a deep voice, "This humble one has said that the Song clan is the descendant of Shinryu's son of heaven. Even though the dynasty has changed, this supreme position that was once recognized by heaven and earth is still hidden in the fate of the Song clan's descendant. The Song clan's luck has suddenly increased greatly, and the increase is something I have never seen before. I'm afraid that this supreme heaven and earth aura will come from the Song clan's descendant that we found." "Sir, are you saying that Luochio, he has the fate of Shinryu's son of heaven?" Song Tianyu gaped in shock. In today's world, there's no such thing as a dynasty. Mr. Blind shook his head again. Whether one can transform into a dragon and stand at the pinnacle of mortals, there are still many unfathomable factors. Furthermore, I have yet to meet this Master Cho personally, so I don't dare to make any assertions. But there is one thing that this humble one can be sure of. The Song clan's sudden increase in luck will cause the luck of everyone related to the Song clan to increase greatly. Even I have a feeling that this is due to luck. Perhaps the entire Song clan will advance further because of this. The pinnacle of aristocratic families was already the pinnacle of aristocratic families. If the pinnacle of aristocratic families advanced further, Song Tianyu's gaze instantly turned solemn. That would be the realm of the nation. This is an important matter. I will keep it a secret. Song Tianyu pondered for a moment. I was originally a little hesitant, but after listening to your words, I suddenly see the light. I have already made up my mind. As if he knew what Song Tianyu was thinking, Mr. Blind suddenly said, "Old Master Song, there is no need to be too anxious. There will always be a time when a person's strength is limited. Fate is fleeting and the winds and clouds change. It is better to plan carefully before taking action. I will follow your advice." Song Tianyu nodded. In the dark night, a scream suddenly came from a hospital. At the same time, it alarmed Song Tianyu and Mr. Blind, who were having a secret conversation. Naturally, The Song brothers and Song Howren were also involved. I wonder if Miss Ying's temper will embarrass young Master Chio. Fifth uncle walked in the corridor of the inpatient department of the hospital with his hands behind his back. Later, he came to a conclusion. It was better to leave the younger generation's matters to them. Old people shouldn't worry too much. But what made Uncle Wu feel strange was that when Luochio woke up, he had already called through the pager at the head of the bed. However, not only the doctor, but also the nurse didn't show up for a long time. Was the hospital so busy tonight? Maybe it was because they were busy dealing with the wounded sent from the castle by the rescue team. Uncle Wu knocked on the door of the duty room, but he didn't see anyone. Uncle Wu frowned in confusion. Suddenly, he heard some strange sounds coming from under a table in the duty room. Out of curiosity, Uncle Wu slowly walked towards the table. "What's the matter?" Unexpectedly, at this moment, someone's voice suddenly came from behind. Fifth uncle quickly turned around and saw a slightly tired young doctor. Uncle Wu said indifferently, "Nothing, I just pressed the pager, but didn't see anyone, so I came to see in person." The young male doctor glanced at the duty room randomly and said, "Maybe they are too busy, so they transferred the people here. Which ward is it? I'll go and see right away." "Ward A01. The young doctor was stunned and then nodded quickly. "Sir, wait for me for a moment. I'll put something down and then go there right away. Is that okay?" He knew that the identity of the person who lived in this ward was definitely not simple, because this was the best ward in the hospital. Uncle Wu nodded. "Okay, then I'll go back first." The young doctor hurriedly agreed and watched as fifth uncle slowly walked away. The young doctor breathed a sigh of relief and then rubbed his eyebrows. He was so busy tonight that he didn't even have time to eat dinner. He had been hungry for a long time. However, he still wanted to go to Ward 01 and get something to eat when he came back. He poured a glass of water and planned to look for the medical record after drinking it and then go there. However, when the young doctor was drinking water, he suddenly heard a strange sound behind him, which made him turn around curiously. The sound seemed to come from behind a desk in the corner in front of him. The young doctor frowned and walked over step by step with a glass of water. However, when he walked to a position where he could see, he found nothing. The chair just moved a little, and then some documents fell to the ground. The young doctor shook his head and thought that he might be too tired. He walked over, bent over to pick up the documents on the ground, and put them back on the table. Then, he glanced at a photo on the table. This was the position of his colleague, and the photo was taken with his girlfriend at the same time. The young doctor smiled. He really wanted to have a girlfriend. Such a thought suddenly rose in his heart, but the doctor's time was too busy. He was completely free to die, but he didn't have time to get sick. He looked at it with self-mockery and turned around. However, at this moment, he was suddenly startled. It was his colleague. At the same time, he lowered his head at this moment, and his body trembled slightly. The young doctor sighed at this time. "I was scared to death by you." He patted his colleague's shoulder casually, but his colleague still lowered his head and remained motionless. "What's wrong with you? Are you not feeling well? Jack, are you all right?" The young man called out again. At this time, his colleague Jack suddenly raised his head. His face was pale, his eyeballs were rolled up, and his mouth was suddenly opened. The paper cup fell to the ground, and the water that hadn't been drunk spilled all over the floor. Zhong Luo didn't go back to see Ouyang Jie immediately, but came to a separate ward. She asked the bodyguards to stay outside the door and walked in alone. Of course, this ward was not as well guarded as the one with the best conditions, but it was already one of the best in the hospital. The one in the ward was not a patient, but a girl who seemed to be suffering from albinism. When Zhong Luoyue knocked on the door and entered, the girl was standing by the window, looking at the distance obliquely. Zhong Luoyue felt that she should have heard her coming in, so she didn't ask abruptly, but directly asked, "Is this the direction of your home?" The girl turned around. Elizabeth. Elizabeth looked at Zhong Luoyue and said, "My grandfather told me that after this hunting day, we won't go home first. Instead, we'll go to the Mediterranean Sea. That's where my mother grew up." She lowered her head. Although she was smiling, she couldn't help but feel heartache. She whispered, "Grandpa said that I have few opportunities to walk outside, so I take this opportunity to travel a little. I'm actually looking forward to it. Jean Louis patted Elizabeth's shoulder. Your grandpa will be very happy to see you can walk freely now. Because of a telepathic trip, Jean Louis's memory was also entangled with Elizabeth's past. Because of this entanglement, even though she had not really met Amand, Jean Louis felt a sense of sadness in her heart that did not belong to her, but it was very real. She and Elizabeth had only known each other for half a day, but they were like good friends who had accompanied each other for half their lives. A very strange thing. What are your plans after this? Jean Louis suddenly asked. Elizabeth shook her head. I don't know. Maybe I'll walk around and see the outside world, or maybe I'll go back to my house and deal with some things. In fact, I don't know if I can deal with these things well. These things used to be taken care of by my grandpa, and I've been sleeping most of the time. Although Elizabeth was a mixed blood that was not popular among vampires, her father was indeed a purebred vampire when he was still alive, and he had many properties. Jean Louis thought for a while and said, Why don't you stay with me for the time being? Elizabeth looked at Jean Louis. I'm actually doing this for myself, Jean Louis said seriously. In my current situation, if I don't have an elder by my side, I'll feel very uneasy. Maybe you feel that this is too much, but at least I can guarantee that I can give you a lot of help and help you deal with your family's properties. Of course, I don't have any intention of coveting these properties. Elizabeth shook her head. Your family is much richer than me. I'm not worried about this. Because of our telepathic trip, our memories are entangled, and now we're like family. I'm very willing to help you. However, I still want to go to my mother's hometown first. At least, next to my mother's grave, I'll arrange a place for my grandpa. Of course, Jean Louis was immediately overjoyed. I'll go with you. I'll take care of you. She was a little nervous at first, not knowing if Elizabeth would agree to her request, but she didn't expect that Elizabeth would actually agree so readily. As a newborn vampire, the death of her elder lady Eve made her feel lonely and helpless all the time. Now that she had a kindred by her side, she naturally felt more at ease. As for how to face the Jean family in the future, Jean Louis planned to take this opportunity to accompany Elizabeth to the Mediterranean Sea and carefully consider it, giving herself some time to think. In that case, you can just call me in the future, Jean Louis said with a smile. This is the name that only my family calls me. Elizabeth smiled slightly, and her expression relaxed a little, less gloomy. But at this moment, Elizabeth frowned and looked at the door of the ward. What's wrong? Jean Louis asked curiously. Elizabeth said with a serious expression, I smell the smell of corpses, and there's a lot of them. With that, the door of the ward was suddenly knocked open, and a bodyguard fell to the ground, and a middle-aged man wearing a cleaner's uniform was lying on top of the bodyguard. The cleaner was biting the bodyguard's neck. This scene left a deep impression on Jean Louis, because this was the scene she saw in the castle's cellar maze, the scene of zombies eating people. How could this be? How could there be zombies in the hospital? Jean Louis retreated in horror. I'm afraid that some of the survivors have been infected. Elizabeth frowned. At this moment, the zombie cleaner suddenly raised his head and opened his bloody mouth. Elizabeth's lips moved, revealing two fangs, opened his mouth, and let out a low growl. Chapter 907. The zombie cleaner, who was already immersed in the pleasure of devouring fresh flesh and blood, did not know that when he lowered his head to bite the bodyguard's flesh again, Elizabeth quickly walked towards him. If there was no special stimulus, zombies, the living dead, would not have much reaction to vampires. For example, the zombies that attacked the vampires in the underground maze of the castle were only special circumstances. It was because Karen Isher was controlling them behind the scenes. At this time, Elizabeth had already walked directly in front of the zombie cleaner. Her palm quickly swept across, and the zombie's head was directly cut off and fell to the ground. Decapitation. This cruel method made Jean Louis feel a little uncomfortable, but she did not say anything. She even adapted quickly. She understood that this kind of living dead zombies, if their heads were not destroyed, they would only be endless. Elizabeth turned around and said, This hospital is full of the smell of corpses. I am afraid that many people have turned into zombies. Jean Louis asked nervously. Elizabeth, are these zombies really like in the movies? Whoever bites will become a zombie. Elizabeth shook her head and said, I don't know what happened to those movies you mentioned. Watching movies is a waste of time for me. But generally speaking, some people will not be turned into zombies, even if they are bitten because of their physique. But after all, it is only a small number. That is already an immeasurable disaster, if it really breaks out. Jean Louis frowned. Elizabeth nodded and said, Yes, if humans become zombies, vampires will not be able to get fresh blood. Generally speaking, zombies can live for about 50 years. This seems to be the limit. Their bodies will continue to decay when exposed to the air and finally completely decay. But if they are preserved well and the decay is slowed down, they can live for 100 years or even longer. For example, some of the underground parts of the castle should have been sealed hundreds of years ago. Jean Louis suddenly said, If the whole world is invaded by zombies, what will the world become like? Elizabeth said seriously, Someone in the 13 ancient clans has proposed this question a long time ago. They have also made some calculations. If by that time there are no more living creatures in the world other than the undead, then after all the undead die of natural causes, we will probably welcome a completely dead world, returning to the beginning of the world before life was born. The apocalypse and the cleansing of the world are nothing more than natural disasters and man-made disasters. In theory, zombies are a kind of man-made disaster. Jean Louis didn't know what the Book of Revelation was, but she didn't have time to care about it. During this short conversation, another zombie slowly walked by the door. She glanced at Elizabeth, who was very decisive. When we meet zombies, we either control them or kill them all. The 13 clans have never had a third policy toward zombies. Controlling zombies not only requires a special method, but also a special talent. There are not many vampires with this kind of talent, so we basically kill them when we see them. After all, zombies are the same as humans to us. They're the root cause of the extinction of our race. Jean Louis didn't say anything, but quickly nodded and then picked up the guns from the dead bodyguards. Elizabeth said that she had become a vampire, and sooner or later she would awaken her own special ability. However, there was no set time limit, so to Jean Louis, these modern weapons gave him a greater sense of security. I think my shooting skills are not out of practice. Jean Louis took a deep breath, hung the gun bag on her waist, and rushed out of the door. The gun was aimed at the back of the zombie that walked by. One shot to the head. Bang! Bang, 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 bang. In addition to the screams, there were continuous sounds of gunfire, which made Song Ying, who was questioning Luochio, suddenly change her expression. Gan Hong was the first to react. The moment the anomaly occurred, she quickly moved to the side of the window. At the same time, she pulled out a silver M9 pistol and stuck her head out to look. What did you see? Song Ying had already stood up. Gan Hong shook her head and said, I don't know, but someone ran out downstairs. The shooter is the police. At this moment, the door of the ward opened, and an elite bodyguard of the Song family looked panicked. Missing, please leave with me as soon as possible. Outside there are what? Zombies. The man finally said in horror. As he spoke, he heard a blood-curdling scream from outside the door. He saw a guard of the Song family being thrown to the ground in an instant, screaming in horror and screaming in pain. This scene shocked everyone who saw it. Song Ying was shocked because less than half an hour ago, she had seen the video of zombies on Song Da's phone. Now, the zombies had appeared in front of her, alive and well. Seeing it through the screen and seeing it with her own eyes was naturally a different feeling, which made her hair stand on end. Luochio was not shocked, but slightly frowned. The real Luochio and the fake Luochio did not switch for long. He stayed in the vineyard with Yi for a while and thought it was time to switch back. In other words, when he was not in the hospital, there was a zombie disaster in the hospital, but he did not know where the source of the zombie disaster in the hospital was. Luochio instantly closed his eyes, and his consciousness was so strong that it shrouded the hospital in an instant, as if a pair of eyes were everywhere. "Why are you still standing there? Are you scared?" Luocio suddenly felt his body being pulled, and when he opened his eyes, he saw that Song Ying had already grabbed his arm and pulled it hard. With a panicked look, "Go!" "Master Chiu just woke up. I'm afraid that his body is not well. Let me carry him," Gan Hong quickly said at this time. "I will do it myself." Luocio shook his head. At this time, several bodyguards of the Song family outside the door had already completely killed the zombie that appeared. They almost turned the zombie into a hornet's nest. "Missing, we have contacted the master." The first bodyguard who came in at this time hurriedly said, "Master and the others also encountered zombies, but with the young master and Mr. Song, they are temporarily safe. Master has already asked the young master to come and pick us up." "Got it." Song Ying nodded. After the initial panic, Song Ying was able to quickly calm down, not to mention Gan Hong, who was always calm. Although she was shocked, she was not flustered at all. It had to be said that the Song family was very good at training their descendants and subordinates. Probably they will have a good life if it does not involve supernatural matters. Luocio's heart flashed such a thought. For him, to understand his father's background was basically equivalent to completing his initial goal. It was just that Yi had recently completed a big business deal, which gave him plenty of time to extend this holiday. When Luocio got up, Gan Hong had already squatted down and put the slippers in front of his feet, as if she was going to help him put them on. This Song family's training is a bit too good. What kind of standard is this training based on? "Master Chiu, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well?" Gan Hong raised her head and asked with concern. "It's nothing." Luocio shook his head. Gan Hong did not really help him put on the slippers, but quickly turned her head to look outside the door. She was still wearing the dress when she participated in the wine tasting at the castle. She directly tore the part below the skirt and took off the high heels. This was almost a perfect leg shape, but there was a scar of more than 10 centimeters on the outside of the thigh. Master, I will go over there to explore. You wait for me here." At this time, the guard hurriedly walked to the side of the corridor. At this time, Gan Hong found a black pistol from the body of the dead guard and directly put it in Luocio's hand. "Master Chiu, please take this." The gun was not cold. It was still warm. This guard did not have time to take it out before he died. Seeing that Luocio seemed to be unable to react, Gan Hong did not say anything and directly went to Luocio's back, sticking close to his body, and then held Luocio's hands, 10 fingers entwined with Luocio's palms. Suddenly, this made Luocio have a strange feeling, probably from the contact of the opposite sex. "Hold it like this, then aim. When pulling the trigger, use a little strength with your index finger." Gan Hong quickly said, "There will be a little impact, so relax your wrist, and then do this. Remember, when not shooting, the muzzle should point to the ground to avoid misfire." Cough, cough. Song Ying at this time suddenly coughed twice. Gan Hong turned back in an instant and took a step back. Then, she lowered her head slightly. "Thank you for your guidance." Luocio smiled. "I think I won't have a chance to shoot, but I will still hold it." Cough, cough. Song Ying suddenly coughed twice. Luocio said, "Song Ying, aren't you comfortable? Let's go. You're always so slow and lukewarm. Do you want to become a zombie?" Song Ying was curious. Maybe it was because she was too concerned. "Bah, this way. Who has come back?" Song Ying pointed to the other direction outside the door. Who was the name of the guard who went to explore the way. Gan Hong nodded, grabbing Luocio's hand and walking out quickly. It felt good to be protected by someone. But Luocio didn't enjoy this new feeling at the moment. Instead, he was thinking about something else. Zombies were the living dead, and the living dead didn't have souls. Because of the extreme panic brought about by the zombie disaster, the club was bound to have a steady stream of business, just like the desperate prayers of the hostages in the opera house. Because the number of hostages reached a certain level, it directly triggered the transaction mechanism. Of course, it was also because the boss was there at that time. But this model wasn't what Luocio wanted to see. Even the club didn't want to see. If the whole world became the living dead, then those precious things would disappear. The club would also face an awkward situation. That was, there would be no business to do. So there's still a situation where even if they weren't offended, they should take the initiative to attack. Luaccio lowered his head and murmured. He suddenly remembered the conversation with Blackwater. The club's position was always on the customer's side, and it wouldn't be partial to anyone. But in this case, it would take the initiative to come to the non-customer's side. Or was this just Luaccio's own position? There was always a cold light hanging beside Mr. Blind. If one looked carefully, he would find that it was a short sword about the length of an arm, a bronze sword. The bronze sword seemed to have a mind of its own, moving around Mr. Blind and Song Tianyu all the time. When a zombie rushed over, this cold light would immediately shoot out like lightning and cut off the zombie's head. The legendary sword Immortal was only vaguely mentioned in the ancient books as a cultivation system. Song didn't see Mr. Blind fight many times, but every time he saw him, he would be very envious. This was another level of life that warriors could never come into contact with. He didn't have time to tell Mr. Blind about the ancient scripture he got from the treasure house of the ancient castle. He even wanted to tell Mr. Blind now. After smashing a zombie's head with a slap, Song quickly returned to Song Tianyu and Mr. Blind's side. Master is also Song Air and Song San. It should be about time to meet Miss Ing and the others. Master, don't worry. Song Tianyu glanced around. This was the lobby of the inpatient department. There were many corpses around. These were the patients who escaped from the ward but were bitten to death by zombies. I hope so. Although he was secretly anxious, Song Tianyu also understood that he shouldn't go too deep. This would only make his side more burdensome in order to protect him. Strange. Why did these zombies suddenly become quiet? Song frowned at this moment. A few patients who had just stood up and turned into zombies turned around and walked towards the same direction, as if they were not interested in the fresh food in front of them. Song hurriedly looked at Mr. Blind, but saw that Mr. Blind just frowned and didn't say anything. Looking at the situation, he didn't know why. They seemed to be quiet. Where are they going? Not only Master Song's side. On the other side of the hospital, Elizabeth and Zhong Luoyue also encountered the same situation. But different from Song Tianyu's side, who directly fought with zombies, they almost slaughtered their way here. Zombies were like stationary targets to vampires. Are they attracted by something? Elizabeth pondered for a moment, then suddenly said, "This may be a good thing. If they are attracted by something and gather together, then the chances of them escaping from the hospital will be greatly reduced. This can minimize their threat to the greatest extent." Suddenly, Zhong Luoyue and Elizabeth looked at each other. They both thought of a possibility, a person who had the ability to gather zombies. Chapter 908. Despite the speculation in their hearts, whether this matter was true or not, for Elizabeth and Zhong Luoyue, it was not the most important thing. Because the movement of the zombies at the moment undoubtedly created a good opportunity for them. If these zombies were all gathered together, then it would be much more convenient to kill them, and there would be no need to worry about the fish that escaped the net. Because she had already become a vampire, she would not be attacked by zombies. Zhong Luoyue had already killed several zombies along the way, and now she had entered a state that she could not explain. Probably, for killing, it was a hidden factor in everyone's heart. But at this time, Zhong Luoyue's phone suddenly rang. It was a call from Ouyang Jie. On the other side of the phone, Ouyang Jie's voice sounded very anxious, saying that he encountered a guy that bit people randomly, just like a zombie. "It's good that you are okay." In the public ward, Ouyang Jie leaned on the left side of the bed, feeling the cold floor. While he was contacting Zhong Luoyue, he looked down at his leg. There was a bloody wound on his leg. The pain made him frown. This was originally the place where he was crushed when the castle collapsed, and now was fiercely bitten a few times. At this time, Ouyang Jie simply clamped the phone with his neck, then took a bandage from the bedside table and began to bandage it. In his mind, he could not help but recall the thrilling and frightening scene a few minutes ago. For Ouyang Jie, Tu Shunyi and Uncle Kim's life and death were unknown. He naturally could not sleep peacefully. When he was slightly irritated, suddenly a scream came from outside the curtain. Before Ouyang Jie could react, he saw a figure suddenly rushed into the curtain around his bed, attacking him like a patient with rabies and biting the wound on his leg. Ouyang Jie's leg was injured, and it was difficult for him to move, so he could only struggle on the bed. But for some reason, this thing suddenly quieted down, did not continue to attack him, and even took the initiative to leave. Ouyang Jie opened the curtain in horror, only to see the beds in the public ward. On the floor, there were patients who were brutally killed. Most of their bodies were bitten into many bloody places. Ouyang Jie believed that he was not having a terrible nightmare, but a plot that only happened in movies at this time really appeared in front of his eyes. "Are you really okay? Are you hurt?" Zhong Luoyue asked with slight concern at this time. Ouyang Jie said casually, "It's not a big problem, but it's not convenient for me to move. And your bodyguard is dead. Right in front of me, I can't do anything." "Everyone can't do anything. Now is not the time to blame yourself," Zhong Luoyue said in a low voice. "You can't move. Try to find a place to hide and take care of yourself. I will find a way to save you." "Okay, you be careful too." Ouyang Jie nodded quickly. He didn't know the situation outside the ward, but he could hear a lot of gunshots and people's frightened screams. The outside of the public ward was probably a mess, even far beyond his imagination. At this time, Zhong Luoyue was afraid that she could not even take care of herself. So no matter whether Zhong Luoyue was sincere or perfunctory, he could only believe it. Ouyang Jie climbed up with the help of the wall, and then quickly jumped to the door of the public ward, closed the door completely, and then took the gun left by his dead bodyguard in his hand. There were originally 2 bodyguards left, and the other seemed to have escaped early when he saw the situation was not good. With his back against the door of the public ward, Ouyang Jie slid to the ground, and then wiped the cold sweat on his forehead, and in front of him were the dead bodies of those people. This scene was like deja vu 7 years old, or 8 years old, maybe a little older when he was 9 years old. That was a long time ago, after he ran out of the orphanage. That night, after leaving the oppressive orphanage, Ouyang Jie wandered alone on the street, sleepy and hungry, and even regretted escaping from the orphanage. In fact, the people in the orphanage were very good to him, but he didn't know why. He just wanted to leave the wall. At night, there was a gang fight on the street, and many people died. There were corpses everywhere, and blood was dripping. He was very scared at that time, so he had to hide. Later, a man came, and the man saved him, who almost died in the gang fight. The man didn't say anything and just took him to a huge castle. He told the young Ouyang Jie that his name was Uncle Jean. Uncle Wu. Fortunately, when rushing out of the corridor, Luoqiu and the others met Uncle Wu, who went to find the doctor on duty not long ago. This made Song Ying relieved a lot. Uncle Wu didn't have any wounds on his body, but he looked a little embarrassed, and his neat hair was a little messy. "Missing. Don't say anything. We are about to meet up with Uncle and the others." Song Ying made a prompt decision. Uncle Wu nodded and looked at Luoqiu at the same time. After quickly calling him, he took the initiative to go to the back of the team and did the work of covering the rear. "It's strange. Did you notice that there seems to be no zombies on the road?" Even so, Song Ying didn't relax at all. At this time, Gan Hong said at this time, not only that, it seems that even the gunshots have stopped. "Look." In the team, Ahu, who was originally an elite guard of the Song family, quickly pointed out the corridor window with a nervous face. Below, zombies began to come out one by one. Like ants returning to their nest, slowly walked out from different places, and after gathering, they moved together in one direction, moving together. What the hell is going to do?" Uncle Wu murmured in confusion. At this time, Luoqiu also looked down with a strange look. He did intend to regulate these zombies so that they would not bite people, and naturally he didn't need to worry about what would happen next. Human weapons were enough to deal with these zombies that were regulated, but he didn't really make a move, and these zombies seemed to have been regulated by a very obscure power, a power that Luoqiu felt very familiar with. Luoqiu frowned. The rest of the people were alarmed by the gathering of corpses below. Luoqiu quietly took a step back at this time. Like a summer cicada taking off its shell, another Luoqiu took off from his back, and the remaining shell slowly closed its eyes at this time. After taking off the shell, Luaccio directly let his body sink, all the way down, directly to the first floor of the building. He didn't worry about the safety of Song Ying and the others, because at this moment, all the zombies in the entire hospital had been regulated and gathered under his surveillance. At this time, Gan Hong was the first to react. This is a good opportunity. They seem to be gathering. We should be safe on the way and can meet up with Master Da Xiao and the others. Song Ying instantly reacted, but when she turned around, she saw that Luaccio had unknowingly closed his eyes, standing motionlessly. Song Ying was about to pat him, but unexpectedly, Luaccio's body suddenly softened, directly falling into her arms, burying his face in her chest. Absolutely, yes, on purpose. Song Ying raised her fist, but at this time, Gan Hong was one step ahead. She caringly moved Luaccio's shell away from Song Ying's body and checked it. Master Chiu seems to have fainted again. Gan Hong frowned at this time. Let's meet up with Master Da Xiao first. She made the quickest judgment, then squatted down, about to carry Luaccio's shell on her back. Ahu, you carry him. Unexpectedly, Song Ying coldly gave the order. Ahu, one of the elite guards, blinked his eyes and then saw Song Ying's murderous gaze. He suddenly quivered and quickly said, Miss Hong, let me do this rough work. Gan Hong just silently nodded. At this time, Song Ying. It was Song Howren's voice. He led Song Air and Song San to find them. Coming out of the inpatient department, Luaccio followed these moving zombies all the way. He couldn't feel the thoughts of these zombies because they didn't have thoughts. In his black and white vision, there was only a piece of nothingness. Even a gray light didn't exist. This made Luaccio have a sudden feeling of irritation. He was used to observing a colorful world. The whole world in his vision was like an ocean of souls, floating and sinking with countless lights. Some were as resplendent as pearls, making him fascinated. Some were covered in a layer of dust, but there was also a possibility that they were just pearls temporarily left in the shell. Uncovering them was also a source of great pleasure for him. The vacation time was not long, but it gave Luaccio a lot of different feelings. His emotions were no longer suppressed. He knew that he was temporarily freed from a kind of cage. Until now, he really understood the real meaning of the former shop owner's so-called loss of freedom. Either he would completely seal off his soul and enter a state of mental death, or he would become completely deified and completely forget about his emotions as he traded more and more and his abilities increased. Even if he still retained some of his thoughts, he would become an absolute ruler. There would be no distinction between races, no distinction between right and wrong, until he no longer had any attachment to anything. Perhaps, in another sense, he was a living dead. Thinking of this, the irritation in his heart was like a long river bursting its banks. There was also a faint anger. Luaccio suddenly stopped, silently standing in the same place. The zombies around him walked by one. The world was still without any color. Suddenly, Luaccio opened his eyes, waved his hand, fast and fierce. A ripple suddenly spread out from his hand. The zombies touched by this ripple at this moment began to collapse around Luaccio. Their bodies shattered like dust. One by one, they were completely dispelled and annihilated. This was like a kind of catharsis, and the price was that the surrounding zombies completely disappeared. At this moment, Luaccio slowly turned around. Behind him, Zhong Luoyue and Elizabeth were nervously standing at the entrance of stairs. They probably followed these moving zombies all the way here. However, they also witnessed the scene of zombies turning into ashes with a wave of his hand. What a terrifying power! If he could annihilate zombies with a wave of his hand, then what in the mortal world could resist him? They saw Luaccio walking over at this time with no expression. Zhong Luoyue was a little nervous and frightened. This kind of fear was even more than when she met Viscount Fernandez and the monster Uncle Kim turned into. She subconsciously took a small half-step back, but her body suddenly stiffened, her legs suddenly became weak, and she couldn't lift them up no matter what. Luaccio had already walked in front of Elizabeth. Brother Luaccio. Elizabeth's voice trembled a little. At this time, Luaccio suddenly raised his hand and touched Elizabeth's cheek, only to hear Luaccio whispering at this time, "For me, you're like a treasure. How can I let you disappear in front of my eyes so easily? You should belong to me." At this moment, Elizabeth's brain was blank, as if it was struck by lightning. Hearing this, Zhong Luiyue's mind also paused for a few seconds. Is this a confession? Is this a confession? Is this the confession of a domineering president? Zhong Luiyue didn't know how Elizabeth really felt at this time, but she was a person with sharp eyes. Elizabeth's body was almost soft at this time, and her eyes were very soft. Looking at Luaccio's appearance with infatuation, Zhong Luiyue felt that it was over. This man is too frightening. Just as she was thinking, Luaccio suddenly looked at her. At the moment when her eyes met Luaccio's eyes, Zhong Luiyue also had a feeling of suffocation. It was not fear, but she didn't know what was crazily attracting her. A kind of excitement seemed to come from the depths of her body, giving her an impulse to get closer. "You're also very good. I won't let you leave me." Is he saying this to me? Is he looking at me? Is this man making a declaration? Her brain was spinning crazily. First, she measured the difference in strength between them. Zhong Luiyue soon found that her very rich superpower could not resist the other party's real ability at all. At this time, Luaccio was holding Elizabeth's hand. At this moment, Elizabeth's eyes were completely infatuated, as if her mind had been seized, just letting Luaccio hold her hand. He came to the front of Zhong Luiyue, whispering, "The mortal world can't hide your intrinsic brilliance. I can see your inner brilliance and beauty." His palm slowly caressed Zhong Luiyue's face, then lingered on her lips and directly slipped down, making Zhong Luiyue's breathing gradually quicken. Then Luaccio's hand stroked her chest, gently pressing on her heart, as if he was feeling her beating heart. Possession. Luaccio's face suddenly suffused with an evil smile, like a whirlpool, directly sucking Zhong Luiyue's thoughts into it. Yin 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 Yin. Chapter 909. Song Howard met up with Song Ying's group without any danger, because they also noticed that the zombies seemed to be attracted by something. Luaccio fainted again, but Song Howard didn't have time to care about him. The most important thing was to let everyone safely leave the hospital and then completely seal off the hospital. Although the zombies were scary, they weren't impossible to deal with. At least on the way, Song Howard himself had already killed 4 zombies. After receiving Song Ying and the others, Song Howard quickly brought everyone to meet up with Master Song's group. The cold bronze sword beside Mr. Blind had already disappeared. He was only silently observing the movements of the zombies after they met up. What the hell is going on? On the 3rd floor of the hospital building, this was the place where all the members of the Song family met up. Right now, Song Tianyu, Song De, and the others were looking down in shock and fear. The parking area at the entrance of the hospital was also the final destination of all the zombies. They didn't know when a tree appeared here, a kind of thing that could barely be described as a tree. It was now 7 or 8 meters tall. Its whole body was black, and there were branches growing out from the top, but it was made up of many zombies. At this moment, those slowly moving zombies, one by one, walked to the front of this tree and then squeezed their bodies into the trunk of this tree. Their flesh, their bones, their faces at this moment were all buried in this tree. They intertwined with each other, as if they were nutrients, making this tree bigger and bigger. The tree didn't have leaves, but at this moment, they were slowly growing out from the ends of the branches, one by one, like fruits. The fruits were constantly expanding, like balloons, as if they would burst in the next second. Right now, Mr. Blind's face was incomparably dignified. He suddenly pinched his fingers into a sword shape and waved it forward. A cold light instantly shot out from his body, directly shooting into the trunk of this tree. However, the moment the cold light hit the tree, it was like hitting a solid alloy and was instantly deflected. That cold light circled around in the air a few times, continuously shooting towards the trunk and branches of this tree, but in the end, it couldn't even cut the fruit. Its degree of hardness was shocking. Finally, the cold light slowly returned to Mr. Blind's side and turned into an ancient bronze sword, which he held in his hand. Mr. Blind frowned and said, "Master Song, my mind is buzzing. I'm afraid a disaster is about to befall us. The fruit's on this tree. I'm afraid it's the source of the disaster." As he spoke, those grayish-black fruits suddenly stopped expanding and gradually changed shape. They became like flower buds. Only then did everyone realize that what was growing out of the ground wasn't a fruit, but a huge flower ball. They are planning to bloom. Song Howren's heart jumped, and he cried out in shock. Mr. Blind opened his eyes in a daze. His eyes were completely turbid, without pupils, as if his pupils had completely scattered in his eyeballs, causing people to feel a sense of fear. He said quickly and anxiously, "This strange tree is formed from the essence of the zombies, and these flowers can only grow after absorbing the essence of the zombies. I have a feeling when these flowers finally bloom, they perhaps will spread in another way." Everyone's shocked gazes converged on Mr. Blind's body and subconsciously followed this train of thought. If they could not only bite people, but they could also spread through the air. "This is only my worst prediction." Mr. Blind shook his head, but he didn't seem relaxed at all. "But no matter what, we can't let this strange tree continue to grow." After saying that, Mr. Blind directly jumped out and landed in front of the strange tree, facing the zombies that were constantly moving, wanting to become nutrients for the strange tree. He raised the ancient bronze sword in his hand. Instantly, the sword flashed, and Mr. Blind wandered around the strange tree, killing the zombies that came one by one. "San, let's go down and help Mr. Blind," Songda shouted at this moment. The height of the third floor was not difficult for martial artists like them, but in an instant, Songda and his two brothers had already begun to wander around the edge, reducing Mr. Blind's workload. The rest of the people couldn't help much, and could only use their pistols to shoot the zombies that slipped through the net, spreading out a fire net that wasn't too dense. However, they looked at the flower buds on the strange tree, and they were still slowly growing, and the speed didn't seem to have decreased by much. "Old 5, prepare to evacuate. We need to prepare for the worst," Song Tianyu ordered decisively. Uncle 5 nodded and began to pick up the phone, making a series of arrangements. Her body didn't feel the slightest discomfort, and even her instincts didn't produce disgust. Instead, there was a strong urge to move, making Zhong Luoyue feel that it was fine as it was, or take it a step further. She didn't know where this kind of impact came from, but she knew that at this moment, it was as if he had picked up her soul in the vast ocean and then held it in the palm of his hand, touching the softest part of her heart and grasping her everything. Without love, there was something that made her more attached than love. Suddenly, Luochio's palm began to merge into Zhong Luoyue's body. At this moment, Zhong Luoyue felt an unprecedented pain. She wanted to cry out, but her voice couldn't be transmitted. The palm didn't just enter her body, but also her thoughts, as if it was plucking the only fruit cultivated in the sea of thoughts. Finally, it grasped the forbidden fruit in the sea of thoughts. Zhong Luoyue only felt that her consciousness instantly became completely blank, and her thoughts completely stopped at this moment. Luochio's palm was still inserted into Zhong Luoyue's body, but she seemed to have become an empty shell. He closed his eyes to feel, but his vision was much clearer than when he opened his eyes. He could see the gentle light in his palm. He only needed to take his hand back, and he would be able to pluck this beautiful light. Strong, confident, and the most beautiful and most moving light belonged to Zhong Luoyue. Finally, Luochio's hand slowly withdrew from Zhong Luoyue's body. Between his fingers, a flickering light was jumping, as if it was afraid, like a cub that had just lost the protection of its parents and was extremely afraid of the unfamiliar environment. But at this moment, the moment this light was about to leave Zhong Luoyue's body, Luochio's palm suddenly opened, but it was pushed back into Zhong Luoyue's body. Zhong Luoyue's eyes suddenly became lively, and then she fainted on the ground, while Elisabeth was still motionless. Luochio didn't pay attention, and only silently looked at his palm. He was silent for a moment, slowly exhaling, and softly said, "I finally know what this familiar power is at this moment." Traces of gray and black smoke overflowed from Luochio's body, moved and gathered behind him. Gradually, turning into a shadow. The shadow was still forming, and when Luaccio turned around, he saw another him. The skin was slightly darker, or that could be said to be gray. Other than that, it was exactly the same as him. Luaccio and it looked at each other for a moment, then said, "Should I call you Black?" At this time, it also moved, its expression was more flexible, and a contemptuous smile floated on its face, classifying the bad, the opposite, and even the things you don't like as black. Tut-tut, stupid habitual thinking. Luaccio indifferently said, "If I call you Black Luaccio, I'm a bit unhappy. Black and white, if I'm black, you're white Luaccio, I'm quite happy." Its smile was more evil at this moment. Luaccio was silent for a moment, and began to look at the other side, through the wall. Through all the obstacles, he saw the people who were trying hard to stop the zombies from approaching. A strange giant plant suddenly said, "Air transmission," just slightly changed some of their characteristics. Black. Black Luaccio chuckled at this time. "Don't you think it's too inefficient to simply transmit by biting? By the way, I'm not the one who's doing this. You're the one who's doing this, using your own power." "What do you mean?" Luaccio calmly said. It smiled evilly. "I'm not the product of the club. I'm your product, but I think I should replace you more. To put it simply, I've always been suppressed, a part of all your emotions. I'm afraid I didn't have the chance to appear. You and I both know that as long as we work for a day, it can't let us have more emotions. However, this kind of suppression has always existed in your heart. Your unwillingness, your anger, and even your despair finally gave birth to me. But I still can't come out. This time's vacation?" Luaccio suddenly became silent. "Yes, this time's vacation." Black Luaccio sneered. "What a stupid way. But I really like it. Especially Yi. It's really great. She actually made this vacation longer. Ah, how should I dote on her? I really want to dig out her soul." Luaccio suddenly rubbed between its eyebrows. It seemed to have a headache, sighing, "To be honest, this situation is quite bad. I more or less feel a little ashamed to see such a chinibu. It's you who are too rigid." Black Luaccio opened its hands. "With the club, you have the supreme power. As long as you could sacrifice, you could do almost anything. Why not do as you wish? If you want to get something, you can get it easily. Why do you have to go through so much trouble? This world should be yours. No, it should be mine. I can be the master of the world. My will be the will of all things in the world, this world. If I want it to live, it will live. If I want it to die, it will die. I am supreme." Luaccio gently rubbed its forehead. "So you influence me, secretly controlling these zombies to change? It should be said that your power is too useful." Black Luaccio's eyes showed a fanatical look. "Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Even you can't feel it. And I have already changed the life structure of these zombies. See those flowers? The moment they bloom, countless pollen will spread with the wind. The whole world will fall into a panic in a short time. Countless people will be willing to sacrifice everything in order to survive. I created a new order. How wonderful it is. The new order has been created. What's next?" Luaccio suddenly asked. Black Luaccio sneered. "I will be the master of the world. I can get whatever I want. No one can go against my will. After you become the master of the world, what's next?" Luaccio continued to ask. "Isn't the next more obvious? Everything has me, and everything follows my heart. I can be happy all the time, and I can ask for anything. As long as I am willing, I can play all of life once. Do you think I will be bored and lonely because of this? You are too naive. I can let the people I like accompany me. They will accompany me forever, and they will never go against my will. What's next?" Luaccio still asked indifferently. "You think you can influence me? Naive, naive, naive." Black Luaccio suddenly rushed forward, grabbed Luaccio's collar, and lifted him up. "Naive. Stupid. What's next?" "You still haven't answered me," Luaccio said indifferently. Black Luaccio grabbed Luaccio in front of him, fiercely staring at him. "I'm the truest reaction in your heart. Don't you know? Naive guy, don't make a futile struggle." Luaccio shook his head and said, "In the end, you still can't convince me. Why do I feel that what you said is so boring in the end? Interesting and boring. You will know when you try. Come on, let me dominate you. Black Luaccio suddenly dispersed, turned into billowing black smoke, and began to flow into Luaccio's body. After everything had flowed in, Luaccio closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, Luaccio had a wicked smile on his face. But his smile suddenly became stiff, his body seemed to be out of control, and his palms slowly raised at this time. He was frightened and tried to use his other hand to press the palm down. However, no matter how he tried to organize, at this moment, a thick black fog began to emerge from the palm. It overflowed from Luaccio's body and then gathered in the palm. He said crazily at this moment, "I will not disappear. As long as you still want to keep your humanity, I will not disappear." So much nonsense. Luaccio's expression had returned to calmness. Only the black light ball was held in the palm of his hand. Luaccio's palm began to close, and the black light ball was constantly compressed. But when it was compressed to the limit, only a little bit was left. It jumped crazily, as if it was the last resistance. And Luaccio's palm seemed to be unable to close, so it was in a stalemate. But Luaccio suddenly said at this time, "By the way, if you appear again next time, it's not that I let you in, but that I'm bored, so I let you out. Just like this time. If I don't have this intention, but help you out, do you think you can come out? I'm just on vacation, not." It stopped struggling in an instant, as if it felt some kind of despair. Luaccio's palm instantly clenched into a fist at this moment, and the little bit of black matter was completely crushed. He slowly sighed, and then looked around. Jean-Louis was still unconscious, and while Lisbeth was still in a state of absent-mindedness at this time. Dark history. Luaccio shook his head, and then muttered, "The agitation and uneasiness have been vented, and the mood should be stabilized next. I can still continue my vacation for a while. The effect is not bad." But at this moment, a voice sounded in Luaccio's mind. Only he could hear it. He didn't know whether it was his imagination or it really existed. The voice of the mysterious altar in the club. "Congratulations, boss, for successfully fooling yourself. Boss's authority has been upgraded, the function of the critical door has been upgraded, and the option of descending to the multidimensional world has been added." Luaccio was stunned, and then blinked. Chapter 9:10. In fact, it was just a piece of information self-assembled in a form that Luaccio could accept and finally reflected in his mind. It was about the addition of the multidimensional world coordinates. After pondering for a moment, Luaccio decided to solve the problem at hand first. He would study the added function later. Because he had discharged the things that had accumulated for a long time, Luaccio felt pretty good at the moment. But later he thought about it and wondered if it was actually some kind of physiological behavior. Self-release. Luaccio shook his head and then waved his hand to let Jean-Louis, who was unconscious on the ground, stand up slowly. After getting up, Jean-Louis was still unconscious, and while Lisbeth was still standing there with empty eyes. The appearance of Luaccio made Luaccio understand one thing. Luaccio did not have any combat power. He did not know any fighting skills. Although he could buy them from the altar and learn them by himself, it was actually putting the cart before the horse. Because he began to figure out the nature of the power that the club gave him. Will. A kind of will that could affect everything. A kind of will that could even affect and change the structure of matter within a certain range. To put it simply, it could be regarded as a weakened version of the ability to make one's wish come true. For example, the strange, huge plant outside the hospital was the result of Black Chio's instigation. He accidentally leaked a trace of his idea, which eventually led to the final result. Thinking about it this way, Luaccio seemed to understand why the altar opened the new function of the critical door. The only thing that could restrain the owner was the owner himself. Although the owner was only the spokesperson of the club, the power given to him was real. Of course, this power might disappear after he left office. For example, when he took office, he would age and die. But as long as he was in office, this power would not disappear. It felt like he, as the owner, had become the vessel of this power. Every shop owner would become a vessel for this power. The power of the club was so great that even Luaccio could not completely imagine its limit at this time. It might even have no limit. Since that was the case, whether or not the person who was the vessel could make good use of this power was probably a very important indicator. The altar would not be a system type, but a fixed program created by a will that was above this power. The program wouldn't hurt the owner. This time, even if Black Luaccio succeeded in dominating Luaccio, Black Luaccio could still exist as the club's boss. Except for the difference in ideology, there was no difference. However, it was possible that Black Luaccio would not be able to obtain the coordinates of the multiverse. Different containers, different choices. There is already another path in front of me. Luaccio was silent for a moment, and then he muttered to himself, Black represents. At this time, Luaccio heard something and stopped thinking. It turned out that Elizabeth had woken up. Black Luaccio had been scattered by Luaccio, and the will that affected things leaked out by Black Luaccio was also calmed down by Luaccio's own subconscious. Elizabeth would naturally wake up. Even Jean Luoiwe showed signs of waking up. Your light should be released by yourself. Luaccio smiled slightly. Since the chaos had occurred, the next step was naturally to calm it down. It was too terrifying. He actually annihilated these zombies in an instant with a wave of his hand. Then, could he also annihilate other things? Jean Luoiwe looked at Luaccio in front of her, but she felt that the thoughts in her mind were not continuous. It was a very strange feeling, but she just watched Luaccio walk over. Elizabeth raised her head and asked curiously, Brother Luaccio, did you gather these zombies? Other than you and I don't feel any other vampires nearby. In theory, it was me who gathered them. Luaccio thought for a while and said, but there were some mistakes in the middle, but it has been solved. That's good. Elizabeth nodded, as if because of this sentence, she was completely relieved. Jean Luoiwe felt that Elizabeth relaxed too quickly. She trusted this guy unconditionally like this? Jean Luoiwe frowned and subconsciously looked at Luaccio. For some reason, the moment she met Luaccio's eyes, she suddenly felt a vague, strange feeling in her heart. But it was just a flash. Before she could think about the source of it, Luaccio had already looked at her and asked, Miss Jean, is there something wrong? Or, is there something wrong? Jean Luoiwe shook her head. Nothing, just a little absent-minded. Next, what are you going to do with these zombies? Next, they can deal with them by themselves. Luaccio said indifferently. Jean Luoiwe asked curiously, Are you going to wash your hands of it? Luaccio suddenly said, Every individual existing in this world has something that it can contribute to the world and also has its own opportunity to shine. Since it is within the ability, why should we deprive it? The world is and should also be a changeable combination. It should not be regulated by a will or idea. Everyone should be the unique protagonist in their own life. Then a little suggestion. Jean Luoiwe, who was still thinking about the meaning of Luaccio's words, showed a puzzled expression at this time. Luaccio looked at Elizabeth and said, You are now a little sensitive to the identity of ordinary people, and there's a gentleman with good ability outside. Please be careful. It's best not to show up. After all, some deep-rooted ideas are difficult to change. And human nature, most of the time, is built by these ideas. If changed, it will become monotonous. Then goodbye. Wait a minute. Elizabeth stopped Luaccio, who was about to leave at this time, and hurriedly said, Brother Luaccio, I didn't have time to ask you when we were in the castle. If I want to see you, how can I see you? It was probably because foreign girls were more direct. Although they were still shy in character, they were still direct. Jean Luoiwe had a feeling that Elizabeth might have fallen into a trap, but she ignored the fact that she also instinctively pricked up her ears, as if she also wanted to hear the answer at this time. When needed, Luaccio said casually, and then waved his hand. A light began to slowly fall on Elizabeth's snow-white hair, and finally turned into a half-butterfly hair ornament, opening her originally slightly long bangs. Elizabeth subconsciously reached out to touch it, only to hear Luaccio whispering at this time, When needed, it will tell me. I will cherish it. Elizabeth's eyes were shining. Luaccio glanced at Jean Luoiwe again and suddenly said, Miss Jean, you already have it. I won't send you any more. Then goodbye. Listening to Luocchio's words, Jean Luoyue was suddenly stunned. She already had it. Won't send me any more? What did you send me? Was it the power bank that was given to him in the maze? But Luocchio turned and left. His figure gradually faded and finally disappeared at the gate. Jean Luoyue breathed a sigh of relief at this time and smiled bitterly. Jean Luoyue did not know if it was because he had relaxed, but he suddenly felt hungry. Elisabeth suddenly said at this time, You're showing your teeth. Control yourself. Sucking blood. It was an established fact that Jean Luoyue was not willing to face and was not prepared to face. She touched the sharp little tooth between her lips and felt a sense of absent-mindedness. Do I really have to suck blood? You err, I don't have pure blood now. Elisabeth said seriously at this time, but I don't recommend you to suck human blood at the beginning. As a newborn, if your first blood is the blood of living people, it will be difficult for you to control your impulse to suck human blood in the future. Only by using pure blood for a long time can vampires survive the hunting day and not be lost. The point is that you really don't have pure blood now, right? Jean Luoyue smiled bitterly. To be honest, I'm really hungry right now. It's a level of hunger I've never felt before. I have a feeling that I won't be able to control myself after a while. Fortunately, we are in the hospital. Elisabeth suddenly said, the blood bank here should have a lot of healthy blood types. Although the effect is not as good as the pure blood of the 13 families, at least it is better than sucking human blood at the beginning. The blood bank should be over here. This is probably the vampire's ability to sense blood. Jean Luoyue looked at Elisabeth's appearance when she quickly and decisively pointed in a certain direction. She was calm, and even decisive, completely different from her shyness when she met Luocchio. This girl actually has two personalities? Elisabeth seems to be dozens of years old. You err, what are you doing? Let's go. Oh, okay. The chaos did not last long, but for the survivors, it was probably a long wait. The outbreak of zombies did not harm all the living people in the hospital. People hid in different places in the hospital and did not dare to come out, so there were very few spectators in a battle that exceeded the limits of the human body. In addition, it was now night, and the parking lot outside the hospital building was dark. Even if there were people who could see, they could not see clearly what the people who killed the zombies looked like. But this naturally did not include the people of the Song family. It was not difficult to kill hundreds of zombies one by one, if there were heavy weapons. But not everyone would carry heavy firepower on the streets, even the elites of the Song family. However, Mr. Blind's flying sword was incomparably sharp. The number of zombies that had fallen under his flying sword numbered in the dozens. At this time, Uncle Wu suddenly said, Master, our people have already set off. They will arrive in 15 minutes at the earliest. Let's go to a more empty place and wait for the helicopter to land. It seems that the number has started to decrease. Song Howard was changing the magazine at this time and glanced at the situation below. I just don't know if there are still some hidden ones. Be careful, young master. Uncle Wu hurriedly persuaded him. He knew that Song Howard was the kind of person who was born with an adventurous mind, a guy who liked to seek excitement and was restless. Song Howard did not say anything at this time, but quietly grasped the sun god's badge he was wearing and used his extraordinary perception ability. At this time, the whole hospital began to construct a three-dimensional geometry in his mind. He saw the frightened people hiding everywhere, and also saw two women walking quickly in the corridor, but obviously they were not zombies, although the place where the two women were walking seemed to be the blood bank. Song Howard's consciousness did not stay any longer, but searched the whole hospital. After a while, Song Howard opened his eyes and then shouted to the people below, Sir, next is the last batch. There are no more hidden ones. Mr. Blind's bronze sword stopped and suspended in front of him. He nodded in the direction of Song Howard. He knew that the young master of the Song family had a magical perception ability. Songda, Song Air, Song San. Mr. Blind suddenly said, You guys work together to help me capture a zombie. Maybe it will be useful. Okay. Songda turned his head to respond, and then stared at the entrance of the inpatient department, only to see a figure slowly walking out. He didn't think too much about it and sprinted away. With his palm strength, it was easy to smash a zombie's head, but would take a lot of effort to keep it alive. This zombie couldn't be smashed unconscious, but could only be trapped. Therefore, Songda decided to directly kill this zombie. Song Air and Song San would do the work of capturing people. Huh! Songda fiercely shouted, but at this moment, Songda saw a pale face with a rotten wound. But Songda recognized this face, because the zombie he wanted to capture alive was unexpectedly Natasha, whom he met in the castle's basement maze. Songda was suddenly startled. Suddenly, the scene of this woman wiping his sweat in that predicament flashed in his mind. A living girl. But at this moment, Natasha suddenly opened her mouth and rushed toward him to bite. Songda quivered, reached out his hand to block in front of Natasha, and then with a palm strength, Natasha was knocked down to the ground. Natasha was knocked down to the ground, unable to stand up for a while, could only open her mouth and roar. Sorry, Songda said in a deep voice, and was about to slap down, but Song Air shouted from afar. What's the situation over there? The palm suddenly stopped in front of Natasha. Songda's palm did not hit her in the end. He frowned, gritted his teeth, and shouted at Song Air, Song Air, I've caught one alive. With that said, Song Tiaoyao looked around, then quickly rushed to the front of a 7-seater car and directly removed the bumper of the car. With this bumper, Songda once again walked in front of Natasha and bent the bumper, using it as a rope to tie Natasha. Chapter 9:11. In her memory, blood should be red, but the blood in front of Zhong Luoyue was almost black. Generation after generation of blood bags, generation after generation of red and black blood bags. When she held the blood bag in her hand, surprisingly, she did not feel a sense of resistance. Instead, she felt a certain kind of joy in her body. She knew that the blood in the blood bag was sticky, and the refrigeration system of the blood bank made the platelets even more sticky. It was a bit like a handball used for stress relief. Great, you air. You are so lucky. This hospital actually has the Bombay blood type. Elizabeth took a blood bag to Zhong Luoyue at this time. Bombay blood type. Zhong Luoyue was stunned. Elizabeth smiled and said, this is one of the rarer blood types in the human race. Its effect is naturally not as good as the pure blood of the 13 clans. However, among the many known blood types, it is one of the rare blood types that can reach a purity of 43% and above. Unfortunately, I only found a 400 cubic centimeters blood bag, but for you, it is enough for a while. Generally, newborns should not eat too much. Generally, about 50 cubic centimeters is enough. In her memory, vampires would die when they drank blood. They were predators of fresh blood, so they should be surrounded by fresh blood. She had never known that vampires could suck blood with such precision as milliliters. Of course, Elizabeth said seriously, blood is our food, but it is easy to have indigestion if we eat too much. A scientific and reasonable amount of food can not only help us resist hunger, but also let us absorb the power of blood better. You, a vampire, are talking to me about a scientific and reasonable amount of food. In fact, it is because the 13 families have always controlled the supply of pure blood. So every time you eat, you have to be precise, right? Even so, Zhong Luoyue was very smart and did not say anything. She had a lot of things to think about now, but the most important thing was how to make herself not feel hungry. She was not mentally prepared to kill for blood. Maybe when she was too hungry, she would not have any psychological burden, but for now, she was still rational. She had seen some of Elizabeth's memories, so she already knew how to obtain the pure blood that vampires loved. As a newborn without parents, the possibility of obtaining a pure blood was too small. Inspector Ivan said that he would give Elizabeth 10 years of pure blood, but this property might not be shared with her. After all, Elizabeth was also a hungry refugee for a long time. Although Zhong Luoyue felt that she could open this mouth, and Elizabeth was also very likely to give her a small amount of pure blood, if she opened this mouth, it might destroy the relationship between both parties. Unless Elizabeth took the initiative to give it to her, then the situation would be different. Zhong Luoyue did not believe in selfless friendship. She only believed in strong friendship. But strong friendship need to be established. Bombay blood type could be a temporary substitute of pure blood. If a hospital could find a rare blood type, then a rich person with superpowers should be able to get a lot of them. First of all, she should not be in an environment where she was always being helped. Only then could she have a better space to develop with her friend, and not let her friend feel that she was a burden. Only then could they be in a state of equal conversation on many things. Zhong Luoyue slowly tore open the blood bag, and then poured the Bombay blood type into a test tube from the blood bank. She poured it out strictly according to Elizabeth's request of 50 cubic centimeters. Listening to a friend's advice would make the other party feel happy. She observed Elizabeth's reaction and said calmly, "Is it best for me to drink 50 cubic centimeters every time?" She also asked questions which were like common sense to the other party, questions that could be easily answered as sense of superiority. Generally speaking, your body is your most intuitive reference. Elizabeth rubbed a strand of hair with her fingers. We are very sensitive to fresh blood. If this amount is not enough to fill you up, your body will react accordingly. You can try increasing it by 10 cubic centimeters each time and try to find a suitable amount yourself. Zhong Luoyue nodded and sighed. Elizabeth, if it weren't for you, I think I would have suffered a lot. Praise was a show of dependence and need, making the other party feel needed. We are friends. Elizabeth smiled slightly. I will try my best to help you, don't worry. That's it, we are friends. Zhong Luoyue took a deep breath. Without frowning, she drank the 50 cubic centimeters of blood in the test tube. Surprisingly, the moment the cold blood slid down her throat, she felt a burning sensation in her body like a fire. That's it, I became a vampire. The last zombie was killed by Mr. Blind. After that, he put away his sword and stood still among the corpses, giving off a sense of desolation. This blind swordsman of this generation may not see the blood around him, but others could see it. Song Howard could see it more clearly. This was what he yearned for, but Mr. Blind said that he would not accept disciples. At this time, Song Howard brought the only zombie he caught to Mr. Blind and said in a low voice, "Blind, see if you can use this." Mr. Blind nodded and walked to the front of this huge and strange tree. He stretched out his hand to touch its trunk as if he was feeling something. The battle here was over, and on the other side, Luochio slowly opened his eyes and woke up. The first one to notice was Gan Hong. After the zombies were cleared, she changed from a female soldier to a female bodyguard and paid attention to Luochio's situation. What happened to me? Luochio rubbed his forehead and stood up with the help of Gan Hong. You suddenly fainted again. Gan Hong briefly explained what happened after he fainted. Fortunately, we have successfully cleared all the zombies. Luochio nodded. His face was a little pale, which made people think that he was frightened. This was the reaction of a normal person. However, Fifth Uncle and Song Howard felt that although he was frightened, it was normal. Overall, he was very calm, as steady as Mount Tai. This was a person who could remain calm in the face of a big event. Fifth Uncle did not know about it, but Song Howard felt very gratified. Although Luochio's talent had not been revealed, Song Tianyu was very satisfied with his temperament. Ha ha ha. Luochio, how was the story this time? Song Howard suddenly put his hand on Luochio's shoulder. Next time, we can talk about the zombies in the hospital. Luochio knew that a lot of Song Howard's adventure stories were true because he did have the ability to meet those adventure stories. Master, although the zombies have been cleared out, we still don't know if there are still people turning into zombies in the hospital. Fifth Uncle said calmly. Moreover, Mr. Blind has some speculations about this strange tree. The danger is still there. We should leave here as soon as possible. Fifth Uncle is right. Song Tianyu nodded. However, Song Ying suddenly said, Grandpa, look, this tree seems to be withering. Song Ying pointed at the place where the sun rose. Under the dawn, this strange tree that grew by absorbing the flesh of zombies began to gradually wither. They had yet to calculate how many people had died in this sudden zombie disaster. But Luochio said softly, "It's dawn." Just like what Luochio and Zhong Luoyue said, there were some things that they had the ability to deal with, and they would deal with it well. There was the Song family and the local government that had a good relationship with the Song family. It was said that this had alarmed the local government officials and even the director of the military region. As a direct participant of this disaster, Master Song was now leading people to have secret talks with the government and the military. The survivors in the hospital were all under control, but whether the news was completely blocked could only be seen in the next 10 hours, and whether the outside world would discuss about it. The hospital staff who turned into zombies and the family members of the patients who stayed behind had a lot of work to deal with. As for the strange, mutated, huge plant, when the sun rose, it withered little by little and finally turned into dust. But the government and the military still did not care about these remnants, but set up a temporary plastic shed in the hospital parking lot and let people guard it for the time being. However, for the sake of safety, everyone in the hospital was unable to leave. Although Master Song wanted the descendants of the Song family to leave this place as soon as possible, the danger of zombies was too great. No one knew why they suddenly broke out. Therefore, under the tough attitude of the government and the military, the group of people could only accept all kinds of examinations in the hospital. Of course, because a large number of medical staff died, at this time the examination was carried out by the military medical team. Luochio was still in his original luxurious ward. Gan Hong was sitting next to the bed, holding a knife and peeling an apple, but she had already changed into a patient's gown. After carefully peeling the apple, she cut it into small pieces, picked out the core, and let the pulp spread out like a lotus flower. "I'm so angry." But at this time, Song Ying broke the door and scolded, "Forget about the blood and urine test. They actually said something about feces. Why don't they go and take it themselves?" Miss Song Ying, who looked really angry, sat down and casually grabbed the apple on the plate and stuffed it into her mouth. She only ate 2 mouthfuls, then saw Gan Hong and Luochio looking at her, so she stared back at them. "What? Did I eat yours? I'll get it back to you." The half-eaten piece was suddenly put in front of Luochio. "You eat more. I'm not hungry," Luochio said suddenly. "And eating apples should have some effect." Song Ying was stunned. Her mouth smacked a few times and suddenly reached out to cover her mouth and spit out the food. "Is there anyone who is so disgusting like you? Is it not good to eat apples?" Luochio suddenly looked at Gan Hong and said indifferently, "I think it's quite healthy." Gan Hong could only nod. She found that this young Master Luochio was like the natural nemesis of Miss Song Ying. However, she felt that young Master Luochio seemed to have made a harmless joke this time. It seemed to be a little different, and she felt that his mood was very good. But Song Ying was not satisfied. At this time, she pointed her finger and stared. "Luochio, let me tell you, don't think that because Grandpa loves you, you can take a mile after taking an inch. No matter what, I'm older than you." "So beautiful." Luochio suddenly smiled at this time. Song Ying was stunned and frowned. "What did you say?" Luochio said softly, "Do you still remember the last time when I followed you to Song Dynasty Hotel? At that time, you were busy all night, and there was no expression on your face at all. You were as cold as a machine. But now you look much better, really beautiful. Don't think that by praising me, you can forget about it." Luochio held up the fruit plate and put it in front of Song Ying. "You've been busy all night. Eat something that's good for your body." So angry, but she just couldn't find a reason to give birth to it. But she was really angry. Song Ying fiercely stared at him again, and then grabbed the fruit plate. She ate it without saying a word, but she was thinking about something that happened before she came back. Because of this chaos, many places in the hospital were damaged. Song Ying remembered that she secretly bribed a nurse to steal a blood sample last night. Who knew when she would have the chance to draw blood again? It would be best if the sample could be found back. Now that the hospital was full of good and bad people, who knew if this matter would be leaked? If Song Tianyu knew, Song Ying would definitely be in trouble. Grandpa Song hated this kind of distrust between family members the most. But what Song Ying didn't expect was that when she found the doctor, she was told that the test report was already out. She was dumbfounded on the spot. She only heard the doctor in charge of the test, with a smile on his face that made people want to beat him up, said, "Oh, I'm so lucky. Last night, I was hiding in a laboratory all the time. Miss Song, you also know that the work of testing is very boring. I like to listen to music and then close the door. I didn't expect to avoid a disaster like this. By the way, Miss Song, the test results you asked for, I also finished it overnight." Song Ying unhappily took the report and read it carefully. At this time, the laboratory doctor said, "Miss Song, according to the 2 blood samples you sent, my comparison result is that the owners of these 2 blood samples should be relatives, but they should not be direct descendants." The other one was her own. Holding this report, Song Ying, who was a little dazed, didn't know how she walked out, and unknowingly ran to Luocchio's ward. It's not good to eat too much. After all, it's raw and cold food on an empty stomach, easy to have diarrhea. Luoccio's voice suddenly came, and Song Ying was startled, subconsciously looking at the fruit plate in her hand. She had unknowingly finished the apple peel by Gan Hong. Chapter 9:12. Opening the curtains slightly, Zhong Luoyue placed her finger on a ray of sunlight. Immediately, she felt as though she was being burned by flames. She immediately withdrew her hand. Daytime should be the time when one's energy was at its peak. However, there was no doubt that she was extremely sleepy right now. Zhong Luoyue yawned. Her head felt heavy. Then, she glanced at the wardrobe. Elizabeth was inside the wardrobe. She had fallen asleep early. They had secretly left the hospital before daybreak. They had avoided the lockdown of the government and military personnel. Then, they had casually found a decent hotel to stay in. Luoyue. At this moment, Zhong Luoyue was making an international call. The other end of the call was the capital of China. Due to the time difference, her grandfather Zhong, had fallen asleep early. The one who answered the call was Grandfather Luo. He was a comrade who had followed Grandfather Zhong for half a century and had gone through life and death with him. "I'm listening, Grandfather Luo." Zhong Luoyue rubbed her eyebrows. Then, she replied, "However, I'm still somewhat absent-minded. My mind is not clear." There were many reasons for her to call home. In fact, before she had arrived in this city to attend the banquet at Tushini Winery, her bodyguards had been attacked by the Song family. When the bodyguards were sent to the hospital, her family, who was far away in Beijing, had already received the news. Then, the manor had collapsed, and the zombie crisis had occurred in the hospital. These were all things that could not be concealed. It is normal for your mind to not be clear. Grandfather Luo's voice was kind. No matter who it is, they would not feel good about it. "Luowe, don't worry. I will immediately arrange for someone to bring you back. This time, the Song family has gone too far. It is time to knock some sense into them." "Grandfather Luo, this matter does not have much to do with the Song family." Zhong Luoyue forced herself to stay alert. "Song Ying was only joking with me. Right now, the Song family is already in a terrible fix. We could just sit back and watch." "However," Grandfather Luo said in a deep voice, "regardless of whether it's a conspiracy or an overt scheme, there are some publicly recognized rules in the business wars and struggles between aristocratic families. Directly attacking a descendant of an aristocratic family is a violation of the rules. The Zhong family and the Song family don't have any business conflicts. At most, they only met in the gambling industry. Originally, they didn't interfere with each other's business. Don't worry, the Zhong family isn't without anything. Since you've already experienced it, there are some things that the old master will tell you when you come back." Sure enough, the Zhong family was hiding something that no one knew about. Perhaps it is some kind of powerful force, but Zhong Luoyue is not optimistic about it because there is still that mysterious person in the Song family. Zhong Luoyue was too sleepy, so she couldn't really hear what Grandpa Luo was saying over the phone. She could only reply a few words, and when the call ended, Zhong Luoyue fell asleep on the table. She dreamed of the time when she was training in the army, when she was young and lost in the forest. He hid in a tree hole and curled up in fear. From time to time, the cries of wild beasts could be heard from the forest. Zhong Luoyue always felt that this memory was somewhat vague. Perhaps it was because she really wanted to forget this terrible experience. "Are you also lost?" she suddenly heard a young and tender voice. A small head suddenly popped out from the tree hole, and there was also light fire. "I am also lost. The leaves are blocking the sky, and I can't find the North Star. So, can you let me hide here for a while? My father said that it would be safer to hide at night." It was a little boy, not very old, perhaps a few years younger than her. He was holding a torch in his hand. She couldn't remember clearly. 48 hours had passed since the incident, which was also 2 days. According to crisis management, the best time to deal with an incident was the 48 hours after it happened. It was also the most important time to deal with it. Recently, a patient who had taken a dangerous drug called zombie bath salts suddenly went crazy in the hospital. This type of bath salts might be different from the ones that were commonly circulated. It was terrifyingly contagious and could make people go crazy, lose their rationality, and become bloodthirsty. It could also produce serious violent tendencies towards people. It was very dangerous. Ouyang Jia was lying on a hospital bed and watching the local news report. He felt that this explanation was somewhat unreasonable. Vaguely, Ouyang Jia felt that things were not that simple. However, the government had already controlled the public opinion, and the opinions of the people were not uniform. Everyone in the hospital had signed a confidentiality agreement. Of course, they had also received some material compensation, but even so, there were still so-called rumors that were spread. This was also a headache for crisis management, but the responsibility had already been pushed to the so-called zombie bath salts. The government's drug handling department had already called on the community to consciously resist the spread of this illegal drug. They did not want to cause loss of life and property just to get a temporary high. There have been many cases of people going crazy after consuming zombie bath salts and then attacking people. The pictures of the people who consumed the poison that were circulating online were somewhat similar to the zombies that appeared in this incident. People were more willing to believe that this was a drug rather than some kind of panic that would only appear in a movie, right? Ouyang Jia turned off the TV. After that night, he was assigned to a separate ward and underwent various tests. Now, he was waiting for the results of the various tests. Otherwise, he would not be allowed to leave the hospital. As for the so-called human rights, he was not a citizen of this country in the first place. At that time, when he finished his apprenticeship with Tu Shini, Uncle Kim gave him an identity as a citizen of the United States. The issue of his detention was now being negotiated with the local government by the United States Embassy. Zhong Luoyue later got in touch with him, saying that it was not convenient for her to intervene in this matter for the time being. Ouyang Jia expressed that he could understand. However, he was somewhat dissatisfied that Zhong Luoyue had already left the hospital early. It was just that considering the degree of chaos and danger in the hospital at that time, it was understandable that she would choose to evacuate first. After all, the children of aristocratic families were still the children of aristocratic families. Prioritizing their own safety was the philosophy instilled in them since childhood. It was just that he was not in the mood to think more about Zhong Liyue's approach at this time, because for him, what was more urgent was the matter of the castle. As time went by, those buried underground would become more and more dangerous. But the difficulty of digging was so great that many people had already lost hope, and he himself had already prepared for the worst. This trip home, he originally had a lot of ideas in his heart, but now, Ouyang Jia felt like he had nothing. If life was a gamble, then he was the loser at this time. He had not taken care of himself for a few days, and his mind was full of doubts and uneasiness. His facial hair had already grown out, and he looked dispirited. But at this time, he received a call from an insurance company. "Excuse me, is this Mr. Ouyang Jia? A man named Mr. Jean Wuching bought an insurance with our company, and the designated beneficiary is you. We already know about Mr. Jean Wuching's accident. Although we can't determine whether he is still alive, we still intend to contact you as soon as possible. It's best if you are prepared. Of course, if Mr. Jean is still alive, it's naturally the best." Insurance. What insurance? Ouyang Jia was stunned. Mr. Jean Wuching left a safety deposit box in the bank. According to the agreement, if he unfortunately dies, only you can open it. "Uncle Jean left it for me?" Ouyang Jie subconsciously looked out of the window and suddenly felt that the sun was a little dazzling. Being trapped in the hospital was a depressing thing. Moreover, there were many things that did not change. It was not something that made people happy. Probably, why doesn't this guy look unhappy at all? Regarding Miss Song Ying's question, Su Mei found that she did not know how to answer. Speaking of which, Su Mei felt that she was also a lucky person. She survived the collapse of the ancient castle, and there were no zombies on her body. She escaped the disaster in the hospital, but the bodyguard assigned to take care of her at that time was not so lucky. In short, people often say that one who survives a great disaster is bound to have good fortune after. A chance to stay by Song Ying's side was something that many people would fight for. Because she was asked to stay in a hospital, Song Ying was so bored that she almost exploded and could only find Su Mei as a companion. She glanced at Mr. Luochio in the pavilion downstairs of the inpatient department. They all called him Master Chio, and it seemed that he was a young master in the Song family who had the same status as Miss Song Ying. Maybe Master Chio is a relatively cheerful person? Su Mei said cautiously. Even you call this guy young master? Song Ying looked at Su Mei with some dissatisfaction, which suddenly made Su Mei's face a little ugly. Forget it, I don't blame you. Song Ying shook her head and continued to look at the tablet in her hand. On it were documents sent by the group. Song Ying, who couldn't go to work, could only deal with some things here. Then because she was too idle, she began to check the accounts of the Song dynasty last year. Even the small electricity bills were not left out. Why do I have to go to work here, and that guy is happily telling stories to the children in the pavilion? Yes, in the pavilion, there was not only Luochio and Gan Hong who accompanied him, but also several children in the inpatient department. Quite good at coaxing children. Song Ying casually muttered, and then suddenly frowned. Su Mei, last June, what's the matter with the expenses of Zhonghua Street? Secretary Su Mei was stunned, and then quickly looked at the tablet. But after looking for a while, she didn't find anything strange. This seems to be no problem. Missing. The number is wrong. It's missing 700,000. Song Ying frowned. The total number is correct, but all the expenses on the bill are missing 700,000. Such a huge bill was calculated in his mind. Su Mei looked at Song Ying with surprise. Song Ying frowned, took the tablet. Her fingers quickly swiped, and then marked 6 places on the document. This financial handling is a bit sloppy. Su Mei shook her head. Song Ying suddenly said, it's not that they're sloppy, someone is falsifying the accounts. Falsifying the accounts? Su Mei was surprised. Song Ying suddenly stood up. Let's go back to the room. Tell the group to send me the accounts of the last 3 years, especially the ones related to Zhonghua Street. Got it. The two hurriedly left. In the pavilion, Luochio raised his head and glanced at the back of Song Ying and Su Mei. He stopped in his tracks. Young master, what's the matter? Gan Hong quickly asked. Nothing. Luochio smiled. Where was I? One of the children in the pavilion quickly asked. Big brother, you said that Ikaros didn't listen to his father's advice and was about to fly into the sun when you stopped. What happened after that? Luochio whispered. Ikaros was too arrogant. He thought he could fly higher, but the wax on his wings melted due to the heat of the sun, and the feathers fell from his body one by one. When all the feathers on his body disappeared, Ikaros could no longer fly in the sky, and finally fell into the sea. The waves submerged him, leaving only the feathers floating on the sea surface. Then what happened to Ikaros? Did he die? The children asked in horror. Luochio slowly said, Do you want him to die? The children shook their heads. Luochio said, Then you can continue this story. What do you think happened after that? His father, Daedalus, saved him. If I was in danger, my father would definitely save me. A little girl said, Well, he could swim, so he could swim to the shore, and then he found his father Daedalus, and then they lived a happy life. A little boy raised his hand and said, The whale in the sea saved him and sent him to the shore. The little boy said, He met the mermaid princess, and they became good friends. The little girl said. Luochio quietly listened. The story was already a bit strange, but it was getting more and more interesting. Later, The nurse came and took the children away, and when it was time to take medicine and injections, only Luocio and Ganhong were left in the pavilion. Ganhong suddenly asked, "Young master, Ikaros actually died in the end, right?" Luocio nodded. The sea buried him and then washed his body to the shore. His father Daedalus found Ikaros' body. Later, Daedalus took his people and flew to a new place where they lived a good life. But Daedalus was never happy in his life. "But why didn't you tell the children?" Ganhong didn't understand. "Isn't this a myth that arrogance leads to death? Actually, there's another meaning, which is fatalism." Luocio suddenly said, "Daedalus framed Talos and was convicted of treason, but he escaped punishment, but Ikaros died. Don't you think that's too heavy a burden for the children? They'll realize this one day when they grow up, right?" Chapter 9:13. In fact, Ivan Hizenba, the supervisor of the 13 clans, took longer to recover than he had imagined. Although his spirit had already recovered, his body was still weak for 2 to 3 days, and that was under the effect of consuming a large amount of pure blood. Of course, for Ivan Hessenbach, the inspector of the 13 clans and a direct descendant of a certain prince in the clan, the supply of pure blood was never lacking. The living room was very simple, without any superfluous things. Although it was unusually spacious, there was only one sofa, because Ivan was a minimalist. Simplicity was beauty. Vampires pursued all kinds of strange aesthetics, so it was not strange. At this time, Ivan was facing the fireplace. Although it was still summer in the southern hemisphere, a flame had risen in the fireplace. The flames changed and turned into a human face. This was Ivan's boss, one of the 3 executives with the most power in the entire supervision organization of the 13 clans. "Erex." "Yes, Your Excellency." Ivan half knelt on the ground, lowering his head with a respectful attitude. He called himself so, and he was very powerful. If he didn't show mercy, I'm afraid I would have. Chaotic nightmare taper. The executive's face in the fireplace flickered, as if he was thinking. After a long time, he said, "Ivan, about this matter, just report to me, and I'll deal with the rest." Ivan Hizenba suddenly said, "Your Excellency, the mixed blood Elizabeth seems to know Erex. Have I started to get more information from her?" The executive suddenly said, "Ivan, there are many mixed bloods among us. The whole clan's attitude towards mixed bloods is very subtle. At this stage, it's still in a balance. So, don't arouse the conflict between pure and mixed bloods. The rebellious heart is not only exclusive to humans." Ivan was startled. As a member of the supervision organization, he naturally got more information. Over the years, from various clues, it seemed that a black hand had been hiding in the whole clan, quietly organizing a group of mixed bloods and plotting something. Of course, this was only his speculation. But from the CEO's words, Ivan had a vague idea in his mind. Had the mastermind really taken action? The executive suddenly said, "But the things in the castle need to be thoroughly investigated. You can start from Hydasil." "Him? Sir, I didn't notice him at that time." Ivan frowned. The CEO said, "Our people have discovered Hydasil's whereabouts in Mexico. The time was just before dawn after the castle incident. The list of names that Tushini submitted for the hunting day banquet had Hydasil's name on it, so he should know about it." "Understood. I'll head to Mexico right away." Ivan nodded. "I'll let my officer take over here. At present, there seems to be an aristocratic family among the humans who are investigating the castle. When necessary, my affairs officer will know what to do. Some of the big aristocratic families among the humans have a lot of power. Unless it's absolutely necessary, try not to cause conflict between the two sides. We still have weaknesses." The executive sounded a little impatient. Ivan hurriedly asked, "Your Excellency, is there any other trouble? Speaking of which, what a coincidence." The executive said in a deep voice, "I remember that there is a descendant of the Takizawa family in the name list of the hunting party in the castle, right?" "Yes, Takizawa Akiyoshi." Ivan nodded. "His nickname is the Deceiver." The executive said, "A few days ago, I received a report from the Japanese censor. It's also about the Takizawa family. It's very mysterious. The Takizawa family's main branch in East Asia was completely wiped out overnight. What? Ivan raised his head in shock. The Takizawa family in Japan has a fourth generation, and the Takizawa family is transformed from the taboo mixed blood. How could it be so easily? The Japanese censor is relatively weak. Our hands can't reach so far. The executive shook his head. I've already sent more people to investigate. Don't worry about the Takizawa family. Do your own thing first. In addition, a 10-year-old pureblood is a little stingy. This? Ivan was startled. The executive said, since this mixed blood is related to the chaotic nightmare eating tapir, and he's willing to protect it, it proves that the relationship is not simple. The prince's attitude toward Erex is to avoid him as much as possible. We can't give him an excuse to come to us. Later, I'll ask you to send 5 portions of golden pure blood and a 30-year-old pure blood to Elizabeth's home personally. He is really so terrifying? Ivan Hiesenbach's expression changed slightly. The executive said lightly, you haven't experienced it. In one night, thousands of pure blood vampires, including the princes, fell into a nightmare. The fear of not being able to save themselves. If he wants to, I'm afraid we'll welcome eternal silence in our dreams. Every time we think of that, it's so despairing. It's not his power that's terrifying, but his ability. Legend has it that he has the ultimate dream ability. He can switch between dream and reality at will, turning dreams into reality. The flames in the fireplace gradually disappeared. In the minimalistic living room, Ivan stood up slowly. After a moment of silence, he waved his hand. The door behind him opened, and a woman walked in slowly with a cold expression. Gloria, I'm going to Mexico. I'll leave the rest to you. The executive said to try not to have a big conflict with humans. But there's one thing you have to remember, and that is everything has to be based on our interests. Got it, brother. Ivan turned around at this time, looking at the woman named Gloria, but his heart didn't waver. Lowly mixed blood, don't give me trouble. If you don't want your mother to suffer more punishment for you, then redeem yourself. Yes, brother. She was still cold and expressionless. The camp had been set up early, and the vicinity of the manor had been designated as a forbidden area. There were soldiers patrolling. In 2 days, the wreckage on the ground of the ancient castle had been cleaned up, but there was no deep excavation underground. This was the government's idea. No one would care why a large number of people from the Song family appeared in such a place, because this place indeed belonged to the Song family. The Song family's secret village had always been cultivating talents in various fields. Those who were suitable for combat were incorporated into the irises flower. As for those with specialties, they were sent to some important departments for support, even the military. However, the camp outside the ancient castle was just a smokescreen created on the surface. The ones who were actually excavating and researching the maze in the ancient castle's basement were another small team, led by Mr. Blind and Song Howren. The team included the 3 Song brothers and 20 elites from the irises flower. The place they entered was the secret passageway that the 3 Song brothers had escaped from back then. This treasure vault was not affected by the collapse of the underground maze. When Song Howren's team made their way in, it was still intact. Gold, silver, jewels, and antiques were all shining due to the lighting tools they brought. Song Howren casually whistled and smiled. I should have brought a girlfriend. For Song Howren, exploration, beauties, and treasures were a very romantic thing. Oni rolled his eyes and casually picked up a string of jewels and hung it around his neck. It looked as vulgar as it could get. Then, Luvia gave him a fierce kick. Mr. Blind said indifferently, be careful. There's a large amount of death energy here. According to Song Da's description, there are still a lot of zombies hidden here. Oni and Luvia restrained themselves. There were many instructors in the village who were said to have all kinds of skills. Mr. Blind would not participate in any of the classes. However, everyone in the village actually hoped to be able to stay by Mr. Blind's side for a while, because Mr. Blind's occasional 1 or 2 words of advice could benefit them immensely. Master Song was someone they had to be loyal to. Thus, Mr. Blind was someone they had to respect. Let's split up and explore. Song Howren began to give out orders. Mr. Songda, Mr. Song Air, You two lead 15 people. Mr. Song, Sam will follow me. I will lead the rest and follow Mr. Blind. How about it? Mr. Blind nodded. Okay. Song Da's three brothers also nodded. They had no objection to Song Howren's arrangement. In this way, both teams would have people who were familiar with the underground maze. Song Da and Song Air quickly led their own people and opened the door of the treasure house. They went up the spiral staircase. As for Mr. Blind, he did not move. Instead, he sat on the ground and meditated. According to him, he was sensing the source of the death energy. Mr. Blind said that this place was a place with good feng shui. It was suitable for raising zombies. However, a place with good feng shui was not unchanging. It could gather and naturally could be scattered. For a place with good feng shui to raise zombies, it was naturally better to destroy it than to keep it. Suddenly, Mr. Blind shouted in a deep voice. Who is it? His voice was loud and clear, causing pain in people's ears. Mr. Blind quickly stood up and snorted. He waved his hand and a cold light shot out. The cold light seemed to have pierced something in the air. In the end, it hit the wall. It was a shadow. The shadow was being held up by the ancient bronze sword. In an instant, the shadow slithered away from the wall and escaped through the door of the treasure house. Song-san, you stay here. Mr. Blind gave the order and chased after the shadow. Seeing Mr. Blind's agile movements, Song-san could not help but sigh. This guy is really blind. Everyone be careful. There might be other enemies. Be on your guard. Song Howren shouted in a deep voice. He activated his magical perception with all his might. Everyone held the modern weapons in their hands tightly and spread out to observe their surroundings. All of a sudden, Song Howren opened his eyes and swung his arm. A gunshot rang out, and everyone was so shocked that they quickly turned their guns around. However, Song Howren suddenly fired at a wooden box filled with gold, silver, and jewels. At this time, Song Howren gave Oni a look. Oni understood and carefully crept over. It's nothing. It's just a spider. Oni quickly turned around and used the gun barrel in his hand to pick out the spider's corpse. The spider was a little bigger than a tarantula. However, its body had been torn apart by the bullet. Oni took a look and admired Song Howren's marksmanship. If the military advisor participated in the ranking, he would be the #1 gunman in the South America region. No, perhaps the world. Seeing that it was only a spider, Song Howren seemed to relax and slowly lowered his arm. However, at this moment, his heart throbbed, and he raised his head to look. It was also a spider, an incomparably huge spider. Spider! Someone screamed. Song Howren subconsciously looked down and saw that a large number of spiders had emerged from the treasure house. And the source of that scream was one of the village's warriors. His body was completely covered by a large number of spiders. He fell to the ground and kept struggling. The spiders swarmed over his body like a small mound of dirt. However, they slowly shrunk. The warrior's screams had already stopped. When the spider left his body, all that was left behind was some clothes and the equipment he was wearing. In the blink of an eye, the soldier was completely eaten up. There are spiders here too. Here too. The terrifying spiders rushed over from all directions and quickly forced everyone to gather together. Song Howren was sweating profusely. When facing zombies, he could fight against dozens of them. However, when facing these spiders, he did not have a good way to deal with them. At this moment, his martial arts were not as useful as his firearms. The machine gun began to madly shoot around in an attempt to stop the spiders. However, there were too many of them. The weak net of fire was simply unable to stop the spiders from advancing. Moreover, above their heads, there was an even more terrifying giant spider. Its 8 glowing eyes were constantly staring at Song Howren and the others below. How many monsters are raised in this damn place? Song Howren cursed. He reached out and took out a grenade. Using his mouth to bite open the safety pin, he threw it out with all his might. Rumble, rumble. There was an explosion in front of them. A large number of spiders were blown to pieces. However, it also opened up a path to the treasure house. Go! Close the door of the treasure house. Song Howren shouted. Everyone ran with all their might. However, at this moment, the giant spider above them had already made its move. It quickly spat out a bunch of spider silk. In an instant, it shot towards the back of one of the soldiers and directly wrapped around his entire body. As a result, the warrior fell to the ground, and his body, which was wrapped in the spider's silk, was being pulled away. Damn it! At this moment, the giant spider shot out spider silk again. This time, not only did it wrap around the Song family's soldiers, but it also wrapped around Song Howren's body. Song Howren frantically tried to tear off the spider's silk on his body. However, the spider silk was as tough as steel cable. Even a warrior like him could not tear it off. His body was suddenly pulled up. Like a fish that had been caught, the giant spider above them was like an angler. It easily fished them away one by one. Less than 5 meters away from the door, only Song Howren and Luvia were left. Song Howren held Luvia's hand. The door was right in front of them. Perhaps it would only take a second. However, at this moment, a huge pulling force came from behind. Luvia's hand was forcefully pulled away from his hand. Luvia was also taken away by the giant spider from his hand. Song Howren gritted his teeth. Glancing at the door in front of him, he suddenly turned around and reached out to hold the sun god badge on his body. Once again, he fully activated his perception. In the darkness, in the three-dimensional world constructed, he saw the figures that were hung up one by one. They were not dead and still had heartbeats. However, what about the giant spider? Suddenly, Song Howren felt a heart-wrenching pain that almost caused his brain to lack oxygen. Chapter 9:14. Summer 2013, Amazon Jungle, Golden City Archaeological Team. The legend of Golden City and Golden Lake had been circulating in the American continent for hundreds of years. For hundreds of years, explorers from all over the world had come in an endless stream, but from beginning to end, no one had ever seen the true appearance of Golden City, which had sunk into Golden Lake. Perhaps only the emperor of the Incan Empire, who had built Golden City in the legends, had seen the true appearance of Golden City. A small temporary camp had been set up in the jungle. This archaeological team of Golden City had a total of 23 people, and the leader was a professor of archaeology named Dorowen. At this time, Professor Dorowen was in a tent discussing with his assistant, a native who was responsible for leading the way and was familiar with the local jungle environment, and a retired soldier in the team who was responsible for the military force. They had been in the jungle for 20 days. They had arrived at Golden Lake long ago, but they had no clue about Golden City. Many years ago, the local government had sent the army to protect Golden Lake and put an end to illegal exploration. But even the army was not strong enough, and there were still many people who sneaked into the forbidden area. As time passed, the local government's supervision of this place was not as good as before. Professor Dorowen, our supplies are running out, the retired soldier said. The one who spoke was the veteran, Sang Ta. The remaining food can only support us for another 4 days at most. Otherwise, we will starve on the way back. Santa, my old friend, please give me some more time. Professor Dorowen pleaded. I have been studying the Incan civilization all my life. I believe that Golden City definitely exists, and the entrance is nearby. 1 week, at most 1 week. Santa frowned. Professor, you should understand that you and I are hired to come here, and I am the leader of this team, but I also have the responsibility to ensure the safety of everyone. This was not an archaeological expedition initiated by Professor Dorowen, but one with a sponsor. The sponsor provided Professor Dorowen with a lot of information, and with Professor Dorowen's recommendation, Santa was appointed as the leader. But this time, the sponsor did not come with the team. It was even possible that the sponsor was commissioned by someone else. He was just a middleman. No one knew who the real boss of this expedition was. But even if Sonata promised to spare some time, Professor Dorowen still frowned as he looked at the maps spread out on the ground. At this moment, there was a sudden cheer outside the tent. The few of them walked out in confusion and found that the members of the archaeological team were gathered together and shouting. Professor Dorowen called over a member and asked about the matter. Professor, one of the team members hunted a wild boar in the forest. Everyone is happy and discussing how to eat it. Professor Dorowen was taken aback and nodded. Oh, hunting? Who hunted it? Santa couldn't help but become curious. Culture people thought that hunting a wild boar might be a simple task for a hunter. However, this was not the case. An adult wild boar was very aggressive. If one was not careful, it could even bring about life-threatening danger. The team member pointed forward and saw a man sitting under a tree with a hat covering his face, half lying down. Professor Dorowan curiously led his men over. "You hunted the wild boar? How did you do it?" The young man took off his hat. Under his messy hair was a slightly tanned face. It should have been tanned by the sun during this period. It was a rare oriental face. Professor Dorowan was a little puzzled. He remembered that this person was indeed in his archaeological team, but he was not his student. Santa brought him in when he was recruiting people. Looking at the situation, Santa did not seem to be very familiar with this young man. However, Professor Dorowan and Santa had known each other for many years. He knew that Santa was not an irresponsible person. This young man should have something extraordinary. "Song, did you really hunt this wild boar by yourself?" Santa was surprised at this time. He found this young man in the tavern. At that time, he saw him fighting with the drunkards in the bar. He was quite good at fighting, so he chatted with him. After that, they hit it off, and then he joined the archaeological team. Santa did not know his full name. He only knew that he asked others to call him Song. "Is there a problem?" Song yawned at this time. He was about 23 or 24 years old, and there was always a faint smile on his face. In these 20 days, Song basically did not communicate with the people on the team. He appeared to be a man of few words. He just silently followed the team and did his own things. "Amazing." Santa laughed at this time. Song shrugged and said indifferently, "I've been a little tired of eating dry food recently. I want to eat some fresh meat. Maybe I'm lucky. I planned to just catch 2 fish and roast it myself, but then this big guy came to me." This big wild boar was enough for the whole team to eat for a day and a half. It was undoubtedly good news for the archaeological team that was short of supplies. But Professor Dorowan suddenly said, "Song, what are you holding in your hand?" Song was stunned. Then he raised his hand. On his wrist was a small ornament carved out of bone. "This, I picked it up from the ground. It looked quite special, so I wore it. Is there a problem?" Professor Dorowan grabbed Song's wrist and carefully examined the small ornament. This is a kind of ornament worn by soldiers during the Inca dynasty. Its function is similar to the military badges worn by some soldiers in the army today. It is used to identify one's identity. "Where did he find this thing?" "Song, you must tell me. This may be a major breakthrough." "I see." Song thought for a while and said, "I can't tell you the exact place, but I can bring you there. Right away. We'll go there right away." Professor Dorowan was so excited that even his neck was red. He then asked Santa to leave a few people behind to guard the camp and set off with the team. Song brought the archaeological team to the bottom of a small waterfall, but it was not an easy journey. Even Santa, a veteran with field experience, was sweating profusely by the time he arrived, not to mention a scholar like Professor Dorowan. At this time, Song stood on a big rock in the pool under the waterfall and pointed at the bottom of the waterfall. "There seems to be a small cave there, but it's too dark. I was worried that there might be poisonous snakes hiding inside, so I didn't go in. This thing was found in there." Professor Dorowan was resting on the ground. When he heard that, he quickly got up and shouted, "Quick, quick! Santa, find some ropes. I want to go in and take a look myself." Song raised his head and looked at the top of the waterfall, which branch of the Amazon River had diverged a few times before reaching this place. Looking at the members of the archaeological team who were busy exploring the cave under the waterfall, a smile appeared on Song's face. He muttered softly, "It's true. If they don't give us any clues, it's useless. I almost wasted my pocket money for nothing." Sigh. After stretching his muscles, Song jumped into the pool and swam toward the bottom of the waterfall. This was not the first time he explored this place. The last time was a few months ago, and the team last time was wiped out. The impact of the water suddenly soared. Every inch forward took a lot of effort. However, at this time, Song seemed to hear some kind of sound. It was a whisper that had been occasionally ringing in his mind since he survived a few months ago. He tried countless times to remember these strange sounds and its syllables, but every time he tried, he was so confused. He seemed to understand the meaning of these whispers, but he could not organize them in his mind. They were always so specious. What kind of secret is hidden in here? I'm really looking forward to it. Someone from the archaeological team had already arrived and tied a rope. Everyone pulled on the rope and slowly made their way past the waterfall. They arrived at the back of the waterfall. Just as Song had said, there was a cave that was neither too big nor too small. Professor Dorowan looked around while Sonata observed the edge of the cave. There are traces of excavation here. Although it has been severely eroded by the flowing water, it can still be seen that someone has been here before. I'm afraid it's the ancient people of the Inca dynasty. Professor Dorowan took a deep breath, took a strong light from the team member, and shone it into the cave. This section of the road was not easy to walk. It was downwards, and most of the road was filled with gravel. Because of the water vapor, it was very easy to slip and fall. However, after going downwards for a while, the interior had become dry. After about 50 meters, Professor Dorowan found some ancient murals on the wall, which made Professor Dorowan very excited. This is a painting of a sacrifice, Professor Dorowan said loudly. Sure enough, the information given to me by the mysterious investor is not wrong. This is the recording method used by the ancient people of the Inca dynasty. Is it the City of Gold? A student of Professor Dorowan asked nervously. This doesn't seem to record the City of Gold. Professor Dorowan touched these murals step by step as he walked over. When he arrived before the last mural, he suddenly stopped. His expression was somewhat surprised as he muttered to himself, "A black sun, swallowing the sky. What does that mean?" On the mural, a black sun was engraved. The ancient Inca people below were kneeling on the ground. Next to them was an image of an ancient person who looked like a sacrifice, with tears in his eyes. Song was behind the team. He looked at the team members surrounding the mural and did not say a word. He silently observed the surroundings and pressed his hand on his waist where the pistol was placed. "Teacher, what does the black sun mean?" Professor Dorowan frowned and said, "The Inca dynasty had their own worship. They worshipped the sun god, the guardian of the Inca Empire. In the Inca civilization, the sun god's name was Indi, the son of the god of creation, Viracocha. But Indi was the incarnation of the sun and should be a symbol of light. Why did the ancient Inca carve a black sun? I don't understand this either. But this discovery is probably a major discovery of the Inca civilization. Hurry up and record all the murals here. Remember, don't miss anything." Sangta was not interested in this kind of archaeological research. He was more interested in finding the wealth in the City of Gold. So, he looked at the other parts of the cave. Suddenly, Sangta stopped because he found some modern tools in the corner of the wall, a water bottle for outdoor use, a pair of hiking shoes, and a few bullet shells. Someone had been to this place earlier than them. Sangta suddenly thought of Song, the mysterious and capable guy. He remembered that when he was looking around, Song was beside him. So he said, "Song, come and look at the things here." Song. However, after Sangta shouted a few times, he did not get a response. He could not help but turn his head in confusion, only to find that Song had disappeared. At least, he was not in his line of sight. Sangta frowned. Not far away, Professor Dorowan and a group of people were busy recording information. The others in the team were assisting from the side and did not notice Sangta's actions. "Song?" Sangta called Song again. Suddenly, something flashed in front of his eyes. A black shadow. It was too fast. Sangta subconsciously fired a shot at the place where the black shadow had flashed past. The sound of the gunshot instantly alarmed everyone. "What happened?" Professor Dorowan asked in horror. Sangta replied loudly, "I don't know, but there seems to be something here." He looked back at the team and shouted again, "Everyone be careful. There may be something dangerous hidden here. What's wrong with you?" He saw that the team was looking at him with a frightened expression. Sangta frowned. When he realized what was going on, he broke out in cold sweat. He swallowed his saliva and slowly turned his head. In the darkness, he saw a pair of huge eyes staring at him. What Sangta saw was a terrifyingly large, bloody mouth. It was actually an incomparably huge python. Its entire body was covered in black scales, and there was even a single blood-red horn on its head. By the time Sangta reacted, his vision had turned black. His entire upper body had been swallowed by the terrifying python. After swallowing half of Sangta's body, the black single-horned python raised its head and saw Sangta's legs struggling frantically in the python's mouth. In the end, they went limp. The python opened its mouth again and swallowed Sangta's whole body. At this moment, the archaeological team was in a complete panic.